And you're listening to the Ball Earth Skeptic Roundtable, episode 8 on July 29, 2015. I'm your host, John Le Bon, and I'm joined, as usual, by Matrix Decode live from Spain via London. How are you today, Matrix?
Hey, John. Doing good, thanks. Looking forward to the show.
It's going to be a good one. That track was recommended to us by our guest tonight, who we'll get to in just a moment. But quickly, what are your thoughts on Elton John, Rocket Man?
Yeah, it's a good track, powerful, memorable, and yeah, I like it.
Well, I'm sure the relevance won't be lost on most of our listeners. Let me read out the introduction for our guest straight away. Our guest tonight uploaded his first video regarding the flat Earth to YouTube just 3 months ago on May 1, 2015, and has already grown to become one of the most popular figures in the burgeoning flat Earth world. The video, entitled Flat Earth, The Nazis of NASA and the Infinite Plane, has been viewed by more than 160,000 people, making it his most popular video to date, along with 100% irrefutable proof the globe is a hoax, which has also been seen 150,000 times. Our guest is on the record as saying that if a proper forensics analysis were to be conducted on the evidence presented by the globe model, then the globe would be in handcuffs on charges of fraud. We are joined today live from Greenville, South Carolina, by Jonathan, aka TheMorgile. Jonathan, take yourself off mute and say hello to all of the listeners.
Okay, great. Hey guys, hi everybody listening. Good morning, or wherever you happen to be in the on the world.
Well, it's great to have you with us today, Morgal. I should say for our listeners, you were scheduled to be on episode 9 next week, but you've had to step in last minute because the original guest for tonight wasn't able to make it. So a huge thanks from myself personally, Morgal, that you were able to make it. And I can tell you that old mate Matrix Decode over there in Spain, he has just been chomping at the bit. He's a big fan of yours, aren't you, Matrix?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the Morgal's videos. Covers a range of topics, from not only the flat Earth to conspiracy, the bigger, larger conspiracy aspects of things. So yeah, how's it going, man?
Hey, I really appreciate it, man. Flattered, honored. Definitely, you know, I've been sort of making YouTube videos here and there for a while. Nothing major, nothing real important. Important to me, obviously, but yeah, I saw a couple things that started to make a little bit of sense about this whole crazy flat Earth thing, and sort of went to town with the scientific method, which is what scientists use or are supposed to use.
Well, what we'll do, it's only meant to be a 2-hour show, and I should say for listeners who might be wondering, we're usually joined by David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, live from New York. He's not able to make it today. He's off to a music festival, so if you are listening, David, hope you have fun out there. We'll get straight into the show, though, if it's cool with you, Morgile, and we want to start off by giving you a bit of time to let the listeners who might not already be aware of your story, let them know how you first got into all of this, how you came to be, in the space of just a few months, making videos that have been seen by thousands of people all around the world about the topic of flat Earth. So take as much time as you need and give us an intro to who you are and how you came to be doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I should say that just about every video that I upload almost immediately gets you know, re-rendered and re-uploaded by at least a couple people that I know of. And even those are getting, you know, tens of thousands of hits. So I think it's spread out a lot more than just a couple 100,000. You know, just not being greedy, just really being modest. And you know, I'm glad that it's getting out into sort of a more mainstream discussion. Me personally, I was born in Virginia in 1981. Moved down to Florida, Orlando area when my dad worked for AAA National Headquarters up in Virginia, and they located their national headquarters down to Heathrow, Florida, and that's we grew up there in Orlando. Went to college in Virginia, so I sort of bounced up and down the East Coast for you know, the first 18 years of my life. And other than that, now I live in South Carolina. Been bouncing back and forth between here and North Carolina, so I'm from the East Side, definitely.
Alrighty then, and you went through the regular education system like the rest of us did, and up until relatively recently, you did subscribe to the Ball model.
Of course, yeah, of course. If you would have asked me, you know, what is the shape and nature of our world, even, I don't know, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, definitely, I would have, literally regurgitated everything that is purported by NASA, and I would have told you that that is the obvious, correct, verified truth up until, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Yep.
Well, the plan for tonight, we want to look at a few different topics: the misconceptions of the flat Earth, some problems with the Bohr model, specifically gravity. I know that you've done some good work on that. Mass media programming, the way that they get us all to subscribe to and keep on believing in the ball. And then at the end of the episode, we'll have like a general discussion section. But right now, I'd love to spend some time talking about how you went from believing in the ball to believing what you now do, because there are so many people out there who think the only people who believe in the flat Earth are dead people from 500 years ago and fundamentalist Christian crazies. The notion that there could be someone who used to believe in the ball, now doesn't, and it's not due to a Christian conversion. For some people, it's a bizarre thought. They've never considered it possible. Can you explain to the listeners how you came to be believing what you now believe?
Yeah, well, the short answer is I just looked at the evidence with an open mind. That's all it took. A little bit of rational thought, a little bit of discernment, dash of scrutiny, and it's relatively obvious, but it does take a lot to sort of deprogram yourself from what we've all been sort of forced into believing since we were really small kids. My journey, and I think I should mention real quick, I believe flat Earth is a bad word for it because it doesn't accurately describe the model that I ultimately subscribe to, which we can get into. But my transition from a globe earther to a flat earther took me about a week from the time that I first started looking at it seriously into the time that I had went through the entire checklist in my mind of all of the evidence supporting the globe model. It might take people longer depending on how obsessed they are with it. I was pretty obsessed, so I went from a ball earther to a flat earther in about a week. And that was constantly, even trying to go to sleep at night, even to that extent with, I guess you could say mind experiments. And, again, any rational thought, scrutinizing the globe model certainly does have a lot of coincidences, which are, if you're familiar with forensics, a lot of coincidences that are really unlikely mean that the story that you're checking out is highly unlikely, right? So there are a lot of coincidences, also a lot of conundrums, and also the globe model has sort of changed its story as the as the years went on. Really, when the globe model was first theorized, it was sort of assuming that the sun was stationary, but of course then the lie goes even further by saying the sun revolves around the galactic center, which is hurtling through space. So it's just really the whole model is just lie after lie after lie, and I think that it has a lot to do with the psychological effects that it has on an individual, thinking that we're not really all that special, we're just a microscopic speck of dust, orbiting the sun, orbiting the magnetic center of the galaxy, orbiting, flying through space a gazillion miles an hour. And it really sort of puts us in this perspective of, and especially if you consider the primordial ooze theory. I mean, what are we if you subscribe to this? We are an accident because of the Big Bang, which is an accident. So it's just the whole thing sort of demoralizes us as a sovereign, intelligent species and the I guess you could say the heralds of the earth, right?
Yeah, indeed. And for me, when I first discovered there were some problems with curvature on the Bohr model, I was naturally curious to look into it further, and that began a journey that now a few months later, here I am talking to you, doing this show, and I'm really enjoying it. A lot of people, when they find out there's a problem with the model, they seem to want to forgive it. And in one of your videos, you make this point. You say that people are so indoctrinated that they want to make excuses for the Bohr model when it doesn't fit the facts, which is the complete opposite of how science is supposed to work. Have you thought up why there must be a reason why you did decide to pursue the line of inquiry when you realized there were some problems? Why is it that someone like you would keep on looking into it when others would either ignore it or try to excuse it?
Sure, yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do, I've been sort of looking into propaganda. I'm in marketing, by trade, that's what I do. I'm in marketing. I have a real job. I work real hard, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I'm not just a full-time flat earther by any means. I do this in my spare time. But really, if you study propaganda or public relations, you'll find that one of the key factors of it is if you tell a lie, it has to be a big one.
2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good. Ag side. Pitch over. Roger, you have good thrust.
The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it, but you have to repeat the lie over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and they use the mass media outlets to repeat the same lie, where at first, it's sort of, it's argued against a little bit, but then after enough people start to just believe the lie, well, they'll start creating all sorts of evidence around the lie to prove the lie, right? So one of the reasons that I think I was able to look at it is because I was trying to look beyond the propaganda. I mean, I'm not saying I just woke up one morning and thought, hey, I think the Earth's flat. No, I'd seen a couple videos on it. I was simply compelled to look at the evidence, and me being a scientific type person, no, you don't need a degree in science to be a scientist. All you need to do is follow the scientific method and follow the facts wherever they lead you. But that's what I did, just start looking at the evidence. In terms of the curvature, that's one of the things that you mentioned that mathematically proves we absolutely do not live on a sphere. No way you could possibly see skyscrapers from over 50 miles away if the Earth was curved. The math is pretty simple. They figured the Earth has a circumference of 25,000 miles using spherical geometry or spherical trigonometry. The way you can tell what the curve of the Earth should be is just simply multiply 8 inches times the mile squared. And the mile is squared, right? So if it's 1 mile, the ground should drop 8 inches. If it's 2 miles, it would drop, let's say 2 times 2 is 4, times 8 inches is 32, so 32 inches. So the farther away you get from your eye, it's an exponential effect of how much curvature should occur. So when you get past 50 miles, those buildings that we can see perfectly clearly, perfectly perpendicular to the horizon, perfectly visibly, should be a quarter mile below the horizon. So this one single fact alone proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that we don't live on a globe. Okay, and people will, you're right. I mean, they'll just argue with it. They'll say, oh, well, they're standing on a hill, or the Earth doesn't curve that much. You don't know what you're talking about. But even if you double, let's just say we're wrong about the size of the Earth. Let's say it's 50,000 miles circumference. The buildings should still be well below the horizon, so it's all wrong. The whole model of space, infinite space, is wrong. The Big Bang is wrong. We live on the ground, and all the little celestial bodies we can see orbiting the magnetic center are just a magnificent, beautiful feature of our little puddle in the otherwise infinite plane known as Earth.
Very well said, and we'll talk more about some of the problems with the Bohr model in a moment. I'll throw to you very shortly, Matrix. One more question from me before we press on, and that is, I noticed that with your videos a few months ago, maybe even a year ago, you uploaded a video, Morgal, about Boston being a fraud. Do you think people need to already be willing to accept that they can be lied to, the government can get away with it, before they're capable of even grasping the ball Earth lie? Because it seems to me as though many people, the cognitive dissonance has a lot to do with the fact that they think, well, they couldn't lie about this and get away with it because people would know, but we know they lie about all kinds of things, even marathon bombings, and they get away with it. Most people are too foolish or too scared or too indoctrinated to ever question even a marathon bombing. What chance will they ever question a government who tells them they live on a spinning ball? So to me, the idea they could lie about this and get away with it, it makes perfect sense given what I know about some of the smaller hoaxes. Do you think it's possible that the average person that doesn't even know about the smaller hoaxes has no hope of ever really grasping the big ball hoax?
Yeah, totally agreed. And I think really the more brainwashed a person is by the media, the harder it is for them to understand the truth, and that can go, in all sorts of ways. But yeah, specifically, people who still think that Barack Obama or George Bush or Clinton or any of those, false dichotomy Republican Democrats were doing a good job, and they'd vote for him again if they had the chance. those types of people are going to be far less likely to get it, because you're right. I mean, if you fully subscribe to the official narrative, and we're talking all across the board, 9/11, Boston bombing, where balloons, helium balloons, are bomb-proof in Boston, if you didn't know that. So at any rate, yeah, if people believe the standard official narrative, it's going to be very difficult for them to to subscribe, or even not even subscribe to the flat Earth model or the infinite plane model, but even to just consider it. See, that's the problem. Even scientists who are supposed to be rational, skeptical, critical thinkers, they've all been tricked. They're not all lying. They've all been tricked since they were gullible little kids, just like we were, tricked into believing in a model of our entire reality that is totally false. And it's been parroted down through the propaganda machines, which are the federal school system, OMDAF, Operation Make Everyone Dumb as what, starts with an F. But yeah, and then of course the idiot box, which is the television, especially the mass media outlets, but also subliminal suggestions in big budget movies, which are often funded by the military-industrial complex. So, it's kind of hard to get truth out of a group of people who are by nature extremely deceptive and controlling, right?
Yeah, and that's a notion that you touched on in your recent video, Flat Earth is not a psyop. You point out, because there are people who will say, what, are you suggesting that all the scientists are liars? And of course the answer is no, it's not a lie if they believe it. And the vast majority of them do believe it. How would they know any different? So no, we don't need the scientists to lie to us. They actually believe what they're saying. In fact, most of them believe it more than anyone else. If you're joining us late, this is the Baller Skeptic Roundtable. We've got with us the Morgile. And one man who's a big fan of the Morgile is my friend Matrix there live in Spain. In fact, Matrix, it was you who put me onto the Morgile's work some time ago. Just staying on this topic of how we came to be talking about this topic in the first place, the research that we've done to come to be called flat earthers, to this crazy thing. No one but a crazy person believes in the flat earth, but we pursued this line of inquiry to get to where we are today. Just focusing on this topic of how we got here and the Morgile and his journey. Any questions you want to throw to him right now?
Yeah, I mean, good to have you on, Morgal. This whole subject really is an existential topic, and dealing with our whole programming, our indoctrination, and the aspects of mind control. And I think you tackle a lot of these subjects in several of your videos, and you connect it to this whole the programming aspect of the globe model and so on. One question I have for you, Morgal, is regarding your model of the flat Earth, and in your latest video, the PSYOP video, where you explain it's not a PSYOP, and it's one of the issues that we've dealt with quite a lot lately. You have an inverted flat Earth image, and I'm wondering, what model do you support? Do you believe that Antarctica is in the middle of the flat Earth, or what were you meaning by that, using that image in your latest video?
Honestly, there's a couple different flat Earth maps. I really don't believe we have anything that's accurate. I don't think the UN map is accurate, and I don't necessarily think the one with Antarctica in the center is accurate. But in either case, I mean, the outside edge, whether you head north or south, north, as far as I'm concerned, is towards the center, and south is away from the center, the shortest path towards the edge. I've never been to Antarctica, and I've never been to the North Pole, so I honestly can't tell you which one is in the middle and which one is on the outside. But suffice to say that the outside edge is probably a very, couple mile high ice, essentially carved out of the otherwise infinite plane by the sun orbiting the magnetic anomaly, which is our North Pole. So. And in terms of it being an enclosed system, I just don't subscribe to it. I don't see the governments of the world going to all the great lengths to hide the world's simple flatness. If you got to the edge and walked a little ways over the Antarctic, and then there was an edge and you could fall off into space, well, that I just don't subscribe to that at all. I think that the boundary surrounding us, whether you call it the Antarctic or the Arctic, doesn't matter what you call it, but the boundary to the edges of the world is superficial, And I think if we could get over that, we'd probably find other, or at least be able to see other, quote, solar systems, which might look like a big celestial tornado from many miles away. And you know, that's the one that I subscribe to. I also believe the moon and the sun and the, you know, the stars are physical objects, not holograms, but something is compelling them to orbit the magnetic center. And some of these objects indeed fall to the ground in the form of meteorites, right? So what are meteorites falling through a glass dome in the sky, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't subscribe to an enclosed system. I think it's rather a natural thing. We just simply live on the ground, and the objects we can see in the sky are a magnificent, beautiful, and mysterious feature of our puddle in the infinite plane called Earth.
Well said. John?
Well, that makes a nice segue, I guess, into the second topic that we wanted to get into tonight, which was these misconceptions about the flat Earth. And Morgal, in the pre-show, you were saying that you think the term flat Earth doesn't really encapsulate the view that you have, the worldview that you now have. So do you want to expand upon that for us, and then we'll get into a broader discussion?
Yeah, sure. And you know, flat Earth, it brings with it a lot of negative connotations. A lot of the programming is tied to the literal phrase flat Earth. And again, we're going back to deep psychological associations with the pictures that we see in our mind's eye. Your mind's eye is your pineal gland. It has all the same nerves and functionality as your real eye, but instead of using light to generate its image rendering, it's more self-generated by you, and it's associated with any topics that you may have associated with that picture in your mind. And so the advertisers of the world, and you know, you can advertise a lot of different things, whether it's products or belief systems, but the advertisers of the world have made it literally their life's mission to form the associations with the pictures that we have in our mind collectively, as you know, across the board, sort of our collective consciousness. So the word flat Earth just has too many, you know, negative connotations, too much programming tied to it. It makes it difficult to teach new people, because if you just come out and tell a random person, hey, it's a flat Earth, they're going to have pictures in their mind of boats falling off the edge, and so that person is going to basically, and I did the same thing 6 months ago when it was brought up to me. I was just like, no, it's not flat. What are you talking about? Whatever, laugh, right? So it's a bad word for it. By saying flat Earth, the theory also implies that the infinite space model is correct, which it isn't. If you say flat Earth, people think we're on a disk floating around in space. It's not the case. We live on the ground, space is in the sky. It's not even really space, and it's probably not a vacuum. You can't have a vacuum exist to a gaseous body. So the globe model is literally a theoretical fantasy where space is a vacuum adjacent to a body of gas with nothing separating the two. So it's impossible. I think really the better term for it should be the infinite Earth finite space model. But until we're able to scale the Antarctic and see for ourselves, and you know, see if there are any other, quote, solar systems or puddles, then we really don't know. But just my logic, my line of thinking, and my the evidence that it appears to me as it is now, that it's not an enclosed system, and there's probably a lot more land beyond the Antarctic and a lot of other possible magnetic anomalies with other solar systems.
And you say that you work in marketing, so you know full well the power of language in a way that many people, when they hear words, they instantly, whether they realize it or not, subconsciously think of images or concepts. So if flat Earth has been highly demonized, then simply using the term for a lot of people is enough to turn off their brains and make them stop thinking. Or if they are thinking, they're thinking the wrong conceptualization. So what word would you use if you could re-propagandize the people, if you could get them to consider the non-ball earthers in a different way? What term have you got in your mind, the kind of terms you'd like to use instead?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of, whoops, I don't know if y'all heard that. The only thing I can think of, you know, again, because of the model that I subscribe to, would be the infinite plane with finite space. I don't know if you want to abbreviate it, or, I mean, I'm sure there's a better way to put it. You know, I've been kicking this around a little bit myself for about a month. But we've got to find a better term for it, because it really does. It shuts people down. It kicks on that programming. You know, we're talking an analogy. I always fall back to using the Matrix as an analogy, because it really does illustrate the point. You know, if you're bathing in a vat of pink goo with tubes attached to all of your senses, and then, you know, someone pokes at you, it's not going to do anything. But, you know, if we can sort of explain this to people in such a way that it doesn't bring with it all that programming, if that's even possible. Because again, you know, until you've sat down and critically looked at the evidence, our world will always be a spinning globe in your mind, you know, spinning around the sun, spinning around the galactic center, hurling through space. And until you're able to look at the evidence critically, then you'll never, you know, you're stuck there forever, basically.
Yeah, well, talking about this idea of language and its impact, we started off calling this show the Ball Earth Skeptics, and that's what I am, and my skepticism has only gotten stronger over time. And for me, I find this is a useful way, if people want to put a label on you, which most people do, they've been trained to label everything, makes it easier for them to understand simple concepts. So if they have to put a label on something, I think Ball Earth Skeptic is useful because it doesn't use the term flat Earth, it doesn't imply a flat Earth, it simply says, hey, they've given us a model, we should be questioning it. That's what science is meant to be about. We're Ball Earth Skeptics, and we're glad to have more than 50 people with us in the live chat. Crazy Fox, and I'll paraphrase his comment, he says, Morgal is a terrific guy and I love him. We love you too, Crazy Fox, and to the live listeners, I'm taking down your comments and I will be reading them out soon. We'll go to you there, Matrix. This idea that using the term flat Earth isn't necessarily the best way to get people to think about it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I don't mind it. I mean, the problem with it is, you know, it's the flat Earth subject, and the term flat Earth has been used and ridiculed for such a long time now. So there's that programming aspect of programming, ridicule, you know, strategy that to influence people. So I'm wondering what the Morgal's thoughts are on you know, modern science, you know, gravity, Copernicus, Newton.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. And yeah, I agree with you. The Ball Earth Skeptic is a good way to put it. I guess you could probably just call it science, right? Because that's what you know, everybody subscribes to as science. So in terms of gravity,
Well, just
you know,
I hate to interrupt you there, Morgal. We'll get to gravity and all the rest of it shortly. I'm just trying to keep to a rough structure so that when we put the timestamps in for listeners later on, they know where to navigate to for different parts of the conversation. I want to focus still on this idea, the misconceptions of flat Earth. And for me, when I first learned that flat Earthers don't actually believe there's an edge that you can fall off, many of them think that Antarctica is the edge. That alone was enough for me to say, hey, I need to go and look into this flat Earth thing more, even if I don't, even if I'm not going to agree with it. Just out of curiosity, all this time I had them wrong. I thought the flat Earthers thought there was an edge. Turns out they didn't. The least I can go and do is look further into their concept of how the world works. Do you want to expand, Morgal, on your own process, I guess, from what your conception of what the flat earthers thought prior to doing your research to then understanding what they really believe? How long did that process take? Can you talk us through it?
well, honestly, I don't think it was me learning what other people believe and then forming my opinions on that. I certainly was jolted into thinking about it by other people, but I've sort of been, you know, theorizing and experimenting and kicking this around on my own, and I've come to my own conclusion, you know, that it is an infinite plane, and I believe I'm in alignment or in agreement at least with Math Boylan, who was the original person that convinced me that it's something that's possible and I need to look into. Now, on the other hand, you've got a lot of debate going back and forth that there may be a dome in the sky and an edge, and you know, I think it's ludicrous. And again, until we can travel beyond the Antarctic, we'll never truly know. But all logic points to it being, you know, we live on the ground on an infinite plane, not in space. But you know, moving from within that week, you know, I guess you could say it was hard for me. The points that were hard was because there was so many conflicting views on it, right? I mean, I think it's almost like it's getting overcomplicated. It's one of the most simple models to understand, but if you've got, you know, and there are people with different views and different beliefs on it, so everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I think with further study, you know, scrutiny, if we can get rid of the Antarctic Treaty and actually explore and really document whatever the outer edge is, whether it's the Antarctic or Arctic, only then will we really know the truth about it. But I just, you know, I just never did. I never could subscribe to the enclosed flat Earth model, you know, floating through space.
Well,
So.
you're right. There are different models out there, Morgile, the enclosed dome, the infinite plane, our old friend David Weiss's puddle theory. For me, what's important is just to break down this notion that flat earthers believe there's an edge you can fall off. I'm yet to hear or see a video made by or speak to a flat earther who thinks there's an edge that you can fall off. And I think that alone is almost a perfect first step when broaching this topic with someone to say, what do you think flat earthers actually believe? Chances are they have this misconception that there's an edge that you can fall off, and by simply pointing out to them, no, that's not what they believe, they actually think that Antarctica is the edge, not too dissimilar to the United Nations flag, the way that that's been for 60, 70 years. That alone can be enough to get a conversation started, and from there, sure, most people will still kick into their conditioning, which we'll talk about more later, but a lot of people will say, really? I thought the flat earthers thought there was an edge, and yeah, I had the same misconception. Let's chat about it. Matrix, I'll go to you there. It is important to break down the program's misconceptions about the flat Earth before you even try and discuss some of the scientific merits behind it. Such is the power of these misconceptions in their mind. What say you?
Yeah, there's definitely a few layers to get through first before you start considering the flat Earth model. I mean, there's the outright disinformation, and then there's misinformation, and the first thing is really questioning yourself and what you've been told your whole life. So it's a big hurdle to get over. But when you do, it becomes a fascinating subject of investigation.
Certainly, and I think another reason why it's important to break down the misconceptions is because if you try and convince someone that they're on a flat Earth for whatever reason, then instantly they'll try and get you to answer all of the many questions that follow from it. And in the live chat, Waterboard Me B says, and I'll paraphrase that, there's so much that we as humans don't know, and suddenly we're supposed to know how everything works on a flat Earth in 4 months. And of course, he's referring to the fact that this whole flat Earth phenomenon, the one that I call the neo-flat Earth movement, if you like, it is a relatively new thing. It's only been around for 4 or 5 months at this kind of speed on the internet. Obviously, Morgal got into it 3 or 4 months ago with his videos, so it is relatively new. I'm not sure there are any flat earthers who claim to have all of the answers as to how everything works, which is why I think breaking down the existing models in people's minds is a much more important first step than trying to explain the exact model that we're in. And that makes a nice segue into the next topic for today, and that is problems with the Bohr model. Now, Morgal, you spent a lot of time in your videos looking at some of the problems with the Bohr model, and in particular gravity. Do you want to give us a concise summary of the main problems that you see with the theory of gravity and how it fits into the Bohr model?
Sure, absolutely. And just real quick to your last point, the path to enlightenment certainly begins with admitting that we know nothing. So as scientists, we can certainly study and observe and make theories and test those theories with reality. Now, when the ball earth, and we're going into gravity now, when the ball earth theory was originally thought up, it was, I believe, Pythagoras, then Copernicus, then Newton, and we've got all these crazy theories like gravity, which, okay, so if you break down gravity, if the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles per hour towards the east, near the equator, right? So gravity is supposed to be caused by the mass of the Earth warping space-time, and space-time is a vacuum, but yet that warp causes space-time to sort of push back down on the face of the Earth, which keeps us stuck to the globe, spinning 1,000 miles per hour east at the equator. It's actually like 1,100 or so at the equator. Okay, so if you think about it, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of force if you're talking about yourself spinning around the Earth, standing perpendicular to the axis, and being, stuck to the Earth because of gravity, right? But where I've sort of figured it all breaks down is if you travel to the North Pole, right, where you're standing parallel to the axis and basically not spinning at all. If you stand in a spot and try to spin a perfect concentric circle in 24 hours, you're not hardly going to be spinning at all. So the force of gravity that would normally be keeping you pinned to the Earth at the equator, spinning 1,000 miles per hour, would literally squash you if you went to the North Pole. And the physicists of the world will say, oh, you don't understand physics. It's this angle and you da-da-da-da-da. But the fact is, if you think about it logically, gravity would have to be pushing down very, very hard with a lot of force to keep you stuck to the Earth at the equator. and that much force would simply squash you like a bug. It would make you weigh many thousands of times more standing at the North Pole. And so sort of the the excuse that science gives to it is, well, we do weigh a little bit more at the North Pole, so there, it's gravity. But it doesn't account for it. If we weigh a little bit more at the North Pole, it has to do with barometric pressure. That's what gives us our weight. The laws of gravity are a theory. They're not laws. They're a theory dreamed up by proponents of the globe model in order to account for the fact that we're not flung from the Earth at 1,000 miles per hour. And again, this all falls apart since we do have the technology to travel to the North Pole, and we might weigh a little bit more, but the air's colder, and so the barometric pressure is pushing down on us a little bit less. Right? So that's perfectly explained. What goes up must come down is a law of physics. Gravity is a theory explained only in the globe model, keeps us stuck to the Earth spinning 1,000 miles per hour. But what goes up must come down can be accurately and sufficiently described by the already proved laws of density or buoyancy. So it's all about temperature and density. Heavier, denser objects find their way down, and lighter, less dense objects find their way up. It's simply the natural order of things, and we don't need gravity on the infinite plane because we're not spinning around. So we just live on the ground, right?
And to someone who's first hearing this explanation of density and buoyancy, more dense things go down, less dense things go up, to someone who first hears that, who's indoctrinated with gravity, they'd say, well, why? Why did denser things go down and lighter things go up? There must be a reason. And you can flip that on them and say, all right, then, well, you believe in gravity. You believe that things of heavy mass attract things of small mass. Why do they do that? You come down to the same fundamental problem of, regardless of which model you believe in, ultimately the answer as to why, that's not included in the model. So if people who say that they can't get their heads around what is dense goes down, what is light goes up, have they actually got their head around why heavy things attract lighter things? Matrix, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I mean, gravity, I mean, it's a strange thing, isn't it? It's a strange concept once you start to question it. I mean, so many things begin to fall apart when so many aspects of the model, the Earth, the Moon, being attracted to the Earth, and different effects that it has, and spinning around the Sun and so on. I mean, it is a strange theory once you start to question it, and it kind of changes everything when you start to question it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think I've got my head wrapped around it pretty good, because people will say, okay, so if you take a scale, right, like a regular scale you'd weigh yourself on, and squish it in between your hands and look at the measurement, and then move one of your hands real quick, the scale is going to go flying towards the edge of the, towards the wall, because you have to have that dynamic tension in order to have mass. And so they believe that it's caused by gravity. But instead, really, I mean, if you think about it, deep below the surface of the Earth is basically molten lava. And I can imagine an infinite sea of molten lava underneath the infinite plane. But above the molten lava, you've got essentially the nothingness, or the ether, which is where, sort of this lava, this infinite sea of lava, has met with the nothingness, and over time it's sort of cooled and coalesced and caused, surface, and then of course it's very cold in the nothingness, so you've got ice, and then at some point these magnetic anomalies begin to form where you've got, the sun orbiting the magnetic center with atmosphere, lighter than us, but also has mass. Conventional science will tell you that if you weigh yourself on a scale, that is due to the column of air surrounding and above you pushing down on you with barometric pressure. Okay, so it makes perfect sense to me. You've got the much heavier, much more dense lava and rock and oil and all sorts of very thick, heavy, dense things below us. Above us, you've got atmosphere, which is lighter and less dense, but also pushing down on us. And it explains it perfectly. I mean, really, there is no need for gravity. And it's an asinine theory dreamed up by people who wanted to, construct facts around the globe model, which is, in all honesty, I believe the globe model is a theoretical fantasy. It's laughable, and I'm really surprised they were able to pull it off, to be honest.
It seems to me that unless you've been brought up and indoctrinated into this notion that something of more mass can somehow magically attract something else that's not connected to it, unless you're brought up and indoctrinated into that idea, it's a ridiculous idea. It's preposterous. And yet most people accept that as an explanation for why when they jump into the air they come down. And we've made the point before, Morgal, that a lot of people, their education is so sloppy, their indoctrination I would call it, that they confuse the phenomenon they see, that is, they drop a pen, it hits the ground, with the theory of gravity, when the theory of gravity is simply one explanation for the phenomenon that we observe, but they're not the same thing. So when you say to someone, I don't believe in the theory of gravity, to me it's nonsense, they say, well, why don't you just float into the air then? Well, I'd have another explanation. They're not the same thing. The theory of gravity is not the same thing as what you observe when something heavy falls down. Matrix, we've talked about this before. I think it's an important distinction that people have to get their heads around. When you reject the preposterous theory of gravity that denser things attract through this magic force that no one can see and no one can measure smaller things, when you reject that theory, it doesn't mean you reject what we can all see, which is that heavy things fall.
Yeah, I mean, it just means that, this magical, mysterious force, it seems to be the glue that holds it all together, the whole model. And when you begin to question it, you begin to wonder what the planets are and how they're working and what the universe is. And of course, you start, part of this process is looking at NASA and, the stories they're telling us.
Well, I do promise we'll look more at NASA in a moment, and you're quite right. Gravity is the glue that keeps it all together. It is a literal super glue because it can attract things that it's not touching, and it does it by magic. It is magic. It attracts in a way that we can't see, we can't measure. Now, people who've been indoctrinated into scientism will tell you, oh, but we can measure it. We've got formulas that can tell us how much gravity there should be. You look at those formulas for yourself, and they depend on you knowing what the mass of the Earth is. So you say, okay, then, how do you know what the mass of the Earth is? And they take it for granted that the scientists can measure that. Well, how do the scientists measure the mass of the Earth? Oh, well, it turns out they use the gravity that the Earth has with other objects, and we know the mass of those, so then we can work out the mass of the Earth. How do you know the mass of the other objects? Well, you see, and so you go through it. It's completely circular reasoning. It's utter nonsense. And once you pull your mind out of this gutter that is the modern scientific consensus, once you pull your head out of it and start thinking for yourself, you realize only someone who's lost their mind could possibly think that you could ever weigh the Earth, and yet the entire theory of gravity and the supposed mathematics that they use to measure it depends on us knowing the mass of the Earth. It's utterly absurd. Morgal, what say you?
Yeah, I totally agree. The scientific community of the world, especially on the globe model, there's some other ways this is applied, but they're not scientists. They're anti-scientists, where they take a theory that's not proved, and in order for the theory to make sense, they'll come up with another theory that's not proved, and then in order for that theory to make sense, they'll have yet another theory that's not proved. And so you've got science, something masquerading as science, which is really just, I guess you could call it theoretical, what's a good word for it? Well, my wife said theoretical BS, but I was going to say something more like theoretical egotism. That's the word. Theoretical egotism, where the scientists of the world just simply cannot believe that there's anything but this random nothingness of space and everything's an accident. That they'll never, the Big Bang theory is is taught as a fact, and you're right. I totally agree.
In one of your videos, Morgal, you make the point that people who've been indoctrinated into the globe model, they can't imagine anything else. And I think this is an important point to make, that if someone has been properly and thoroughly indoctrinated into one worldview, and the globe model is a literal worldview, it's how you conceptualize the very earth on which you stand, someone who's been indoctrinated into that from a young age, it can be very difficult for them to imagine any other conceptualization of the earth they stand on. And if they can't even imagine it, oftentimes they can't actually think through which model makes more sense. And I think it's one of the good things that you do in your videos is you make this point that you were indoctrinated at a young age, you believe this at a young age. That was the case for me, that's the case for most of our listeners and most people who will listen to this podcast in the future. We were taught from a young age that the earth that we stood on was a ball, and for many people, they just can't get their heads around the notion that maybe that's not true.
Yep, that's totally right. And the advertisers of the world ain't stupid. If you can get somebody during their formative years, which is the time when, I guess around 3 years old up to around, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, which is where you're really constantly just gathering information and forming your belief system. You're asking a lot of questions, especially, I sure did. If you've watched the video, I think you said you'd watched the Not a PsyOp one. I was always asking a lot of questions because I was curious, and I think that's really just human nature. And so when we look to our parents or the schooling system or the television to sort of reinforce and give us our understanding of the world, especially at a young age, it's really, again, back to the Matrix, it's basically this false paradigm, this false worldview, literally, that has been, ingrained into our mind as absolute truth. And it's almost inescapable if you don't have some sort of a jolt or a reason to start skepticizing, scrutinizing and looking at the globe model skeptically. There's no motivation to do so, especially after that pretty picture from NASA.
Yeah, which they've just released another one of, and we will talk more about NASA in a moment. Just wrapping up on this topic, Matrix, if you like, the notion that people have been indoctrinated. I mean, to the point where if you were to go back and have a school reunion with your mates from school and you said to them, oh, by the way, I no longer believe that we're on a spinning ball and I've got evidence why, there's a good chance that most of your mates would sooner conclude instantly that you have gone crazy, that your brain has stopped working properly, that something really bad has happened to you. They'd sooner assume that than they would sit down with you and have a civil conversation about the merits of ball Earth model versus flat Earth model. Isn't it amazing how powerful indoctrination is, that someone's opinions of you as a person, as a thinking person, can change instantly the moment you say, you know what, I'm not so sure we're on a ball.
Yeah, well, it is probably the most profound subject matter to be discussing with people. I mean, you want to blow people's minds and ruin their day. I mean, just bring up the flat Earth. But some people were open to it. Surprisingly, people who are more, question the government, the media, and so on. Conspiracy theorists. I mean, types out there. I mean, many people are questioning the government now. They're questioning what's going on with, climate change and so on. So I think some people are much open to it, and it's an existential question, and people, are interested in what's wrong with, what's wrong with politics and the world that we live in. And then, where is this world? What is this world that we're living on, actually? So it's a big subject for people to handle.
It seems to me like one of the most important questions you can ask in both a philosophical sense and a practical sense. What is the Earth on which you stand? And yet most people stop asking that question from about the age of 5 because they're told in no uncertain terms, here's what you're on, here's what science says, you're lucky that you have science, if you don't accept science, you're crazy, you'll be ridiculed, no one will like you, so just accept it, shut your mouth, and now let's learn 2 + 2. And most people, that's the last they question the Earth that they stand on because they think they already know the answer and they'd never dare question it. In saying that though, more people are starting to question it. We've got more than 70 people watching live right now. In the live chat, No One's Flower says that maybe gravity is love, mass loves other mass, and really that's no more absurd than the explanation that we get given at school as to why when you drop a pen things fall down. I want to spend a few more minutes on this topic of gravity, Morgal. In one of your videos you touched on the tides and the way that our tides on the Earth, the water, is supposedly affected by the moon. Do you want to give us a basic summary of why you don't accept that notion?
Sure, absolutely. And this is a theory, so I'm not going to say I've proved it, but it makes a lot more sense to me than the current tides model. Now, I still agree that the tides are caused by the moon, okay, but not by gravity because gravity doesn't exist, right? So just looking first at the fallacy of the globe model, so the moon is supposed to be pulling on our oceans with its measly 1/6 gravity, but yet is somehow well beyond the, quote, event horizon or the point of no return of the Earth's gravity, which is 6 times higher and 6 times stronger than the moon's. So to me, it's counterintuitive, it's a contradiction. You simply cannot have both. Either the moon is so far away that it's beyond the event horizon of the Earth's gravity, or the moon is so close that its measly 1/6 gravity is tugging up on our oceans. But to me, it just doesn't, it seems like we should have pulled the moon into the Earth via, quote, gravity a long time ago, right? So instead, if you look at the flat Earth model, which is, the moon and the sun and everything else are orbiting the magnetic center in a giant, flat, oscillating circle. If the moon has some type of a static electric charge or even an electromagnetic field, not a gravity field, but some type of electric field, which our entire universe is electric, if that's the case, like, let me give you an example. If you take a balloon, rub it on your hair real fast, and then hold it near a running tap of water, the balloon will make the water curve towards it. Okay, so a static electromagnetic field will cause water to bend towards the source of the field. So if the moon is orbiting us in an electromagnetic relationship with the Earth, then it makes a lot of sense that the one single face of the moon is always pointed down towards us because it's attracted to the face of our Earth. But it's also very close. It's about 3,000 miles away, so its electromagnetic field could very well be pulling up on the oceans. The question was raised, then what about the other side of the world? Why the tides on the other side? Well, if you look at fluid dynamics and you've got a source of energy causing a wave going around in a circle, then usually you'll see another wave on the opposite side of that body of water. It's just sort of the way fluid dynamics works, right? So does that sort of sum it up, or?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. I should point out for some of our listeners, some of them, Morgal, might say, well, when you're using the term event horizon, you're not using it in a technical sense because, in science they say the event horizon is the point at which with a black hole, if you were to put your matter in past the event horizon, it can't get out, or light can't escape the event horizon.
Well,
you're not talking about the event horizon. You're talking about where the gravity supposedly starts. And if the moon is so powerful that it can move our water, how come our gravity hasn't sucked the moon into it? I completely agree with you about that. I'll go one step further and say this. Up until relatively recently, I didn't actually understand that in many parts of the world, if not most, they have 2 high tides a day. Now, not all parts of the world. Some parts only have 1 high tide. Other parts only have a high and then a meet. It's kind of hard to explain. But the point is, not all tides are the same. But in many places, they have 2 high tides a day, supposedly both caused by the same moon. Now, science explains this by saying that the gravity attracts the water that's directly below it on the Earth. Okay, fine. So far, we believe in gravity. So far, I can deal with that. But it also leads to a high tide on the opposite side of the ball, and it does this because it attracts the Earth more than it attracts the water. So on the other side, so you see you've got the high tide close to you, then you've got the high tide on the opposite. Anyone who believes this nonsense has taken leave of their senses, has taken leave of their intellect. This is utterly absurd stuff, and yet people.
Well, it's another. Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's another case where you've got an unproven theory to prove another unproven theory. So, yeah.
It's even worse than that, though. I want people to picture this in their minds, that you've got the moon above the ball. Okay, let's just imagine that the moon and the Earth are both balls, and you've got the moon attracting the water towards it so that on the part of the Earth that's closest to the moon, that's where the water's at its highest. Okay, if we believe in gravity, that is kind of plausible. But how then can you also get a high tide on the opposite side? According to the official story, that's exactly what gravity does. Matrix, have you looked into this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, you shared a video. You started discussing this with me a few days ago, and when you see the official story about the tidal, the 2 tides a day in some areas, 1 tide in others, it does start to look a bit silly. So. Yeah, man, I think it's a big part of just the reinforcing narrative of the whole globe Earth model. And they're doing that all the time. So.
Well, and this is one of the points that I've made before, Matrix. Let's just suppose that you, I, Morgile, and many of the 76 people watching live right now, we've all been tricked by these jokers on YouTube who've convinced us with clever arguments that we're not on a ball when really we are. Let's just pretend that's the case. This has gotten us to do more research into the official story of the world that we're on. Now, I didn't know a couple of months ago that we had 2 high tides a day in many parts of the world, both caused by the moon's gravity. I didn't know that was the official story. So let's pretend the official story is real. Well, at least now I know. And I think one of the big problems is most people don't even know a fraction of what the official story tries to pass off as being real. And the moment that you start looking at this stuff and thinking about it, you come to realize not only is this model wrong, but it is, like you said in your videos there, Morgal, it is preposterous.
Yeah, agreed. And just to back up the wagon a little bit, the term event horizon, if you look it up in the dictionary, the first term is indeed a place in a black hole where light cannot escape. But the second definition of event horizon literally means the point of no return. So just to clarify that point.
Yeah, you're quite right, and I wasn't trying to correct you. I'm just trying to sort of head off some of the almost semantic arguments that people will give you.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's what people, people will definitely argue the semantics of the situation. So I just wanted to clarify. And again, no, I totally wasn't saying you were trying to discredit or correct me, but yeah, it's a semantical argument a lot of the times, but the facts are still the facts for sure. Yep.
I'm with you, and we do need to press on because it is meant to be a 2-hour show, but there was another problem with the ball model that I wanted to get your thoughts on, Morgal, and that's to do with this notion that there's a North Pole star that we've had for as long as we've had recorded history, and yet the Earth is supposed to be wobbling. Now, I've got a couple of problems with the wobble theory. Do you want to expand upon your own?
Sure. Give me 1 second. Let me take a swig of coffee real quick.
You're right. While you're doing that, let me read out some comments from the live chat. Kane Abel says that on such a touchy subject as the flat Earth, it's good to see that it seems like there are many people who are intrigued, and more than the establishment makes out. I will say this, even though I've noticed a lot of people instantly gloss over in their eyes and the cognitive dissonance kicks in the moment that anyone even dares to question something like NASA, I've also noticed a surprising number of people out there, the people that I speak to out in the so-called real world, who are intrigued by this stuff. And clearly videos like your own there, Morgal, 160,000 views just on your upload, not including other people's uploads, and that's in the space of 3 months. People out there are interested, and it's not just the flat Earth creationist Christian crazies. It's regular people who know that they've been lied to by TV and school, and they want to know just how far the lies go. And it turns out that if you're willing to go down these rabbit holes, it goes much further than many of us could have ever imagined. Chris Frank says that the flat Earth has given me hope again, the realization of a literal heaven and God. And that's another thing that amazes me. Maybe we can talk about this in the general discussion later. The way that this notion that maybe we're not on a spinning ball that's been here for billions of years, that we didn't evolve from the primordial soup, this has given a lot of people, and you see it in the comments, you see it in the videos, it's given a lot of people a hope again that was taken away from them at a young age, that maybe they are special, maybe we are special, maybe this Earth is far more special than they want us to realize. And again, we'll touch more on that in the after chat. But you've had your coffee now, Morgal. Getting back to this problem with the wobble model, for those who aren't aware, our Earth is supposedly not just spinning on its axis, but the axis is wobbling. I've got some big problems with it, Morgal. I know that you do too.
Sure, absolutely, and this kind of goes back to the North Star Polaris, right? So the North Star Polaris is supposedly maintained some alignment, some basically perfect alignment with our North Pole for at least hundreds of years. People will say that it does change from time to time, periodically over thousands of years, but if you think about the model, okay, so the wobble takes a full 26,000 years, supposedly, to do one wobble. But the thing is that North Star Polaris being in alignment with our measly North Pole would have to be, first of all, very, very, very far away, okay, extremely far away, like mind-bogglingly far away. But if anybody who's familiar with sniping, if you're going to have an alignment with an extremely distant target, then your alignment needs to be precise. Okay, now I'm not talking about parallax because they say it's so far away that parallax, when revolving around the sun doesn't make a difference. But what I'm talking about is the wobble that supposedly takes 26,000 years. Even if it, we're talking a fraction of a percentage of a wobble over, say, 30 years, we should have a new North Star every 100 years at the least, maybe every 50 years, because the Earth isn't just stationary, wobbling around on a, or spinning around on a perfect axis. It's hurling around the sun, hurling around the galactic center, flying through space, and yet by some miracle of science, the North Star Polaris maintains its alignment with our measly, arbitrary North Pole, which is totally ridiculous. Furthermore, I think you guys know Jeranism, right?
Sorry, I was just on mute there enjoying my bowl of vegetables. It is 11 p.m. here in Brisbane, I should point out. No, you're right, mate. No, we know Jeranism. We've had him on the show as a guest and also as a cameo appearance as well. So we're more than familiar with Jeranism.
Sure. Okay. So one of the things that he just pointed out, I think in one of his most recent videos, was that, okay, and this sort of applies to the North Star Polaris, but it also applies to all of astronomy in general. Okay, if you can picture this, and I've got it in my one of my videos, I can try to send you guys some pics or something if you want to do an edit, or I can do an edit later, whatever. But okay, so during the summertime, the Earth is pointed towards the sun during the day, and when it spins around away from the sun, it's pointed, let's just say, to the right at night. Okay, we'll say that's summertime. Well, now travel 6 months around the sun, and you're now in wintertime. Daytime is pointed towards the Earth, which is to the right. Okay, but nighttime is when it spins away from the sun, and now nighttime is pointed up and to the left. So how in the world can we see the same stars in the summer versus winter, right? Because the stars that were above your head in the summertime are now behind the sun in the daytime all winter long. So astronomy is, I'm sorry, there's no other way to put it, but they've got their craniums inserted into their rectums.
Sorry, mate, I was just on mute once again. Yeah, I agree with you. And here's another issue that I have with the Wobble. I want to run this button past you there, Morgal. You take any ball and you take it spinning on its axis, unless another force acts upon it, then that axis should only move, to my mind, in a circular plane. That is, I want the listener to imagine that there's this thing called space and that a ball is spinning on its axis. So far, so good. Now, that axis might remain static or the axis might move. But unless there's any other force acting upon the axis, then any movement of the axis, it would seem to me, would have to be in a circular plane. That is, that the ball wouldn't be able to wobble, it would have to tumble. I can imagine it tumbling, but for it to be wobbling, I can only see that being possible if another force was acting upon it. Now, what other force are they proposing is allowing the axis of our ball to wobble rather than to tumble? Morgal, have you put much thought into this one?
Well, I'm sure that it would be the magic of gravity, right? That's what it always boils down to. It's just something we don't understand, we can't measure, we can't prove, so that's what it is. It must be gravity, right?
I imagine that would probably be the answer they would try and use it. But again, these are just the kind of things that if we were really on a spinning ball, which is, when you take a step back and think about it, it is an outrageous claim, even if true. It's the kind of thing that if they're going to teach you to believe in, they should give you plenty of evidence, maybe the kind of evidence that you would need to be a bit older to grasp in the first place, rather than a 5-year-old kid. How many people even pondered how it's possible that a ball could tumble on its axis, wobble on its axis rather, without another force acting upon it? Matrix, we've talked about this briefly on the impromptu chats you and I sometimes do. Have you given much more thought to this wobble of the axis, and have you found a legitimate answer that fits in with the ball model?
Well, yeah, I've been contemplating, how the axis of the Earth and the tilt and so on, and the wobble on various issues to do with this. There seem to be quite a few different ones because apparently Earth is kept in its angular alignment, due to the conservation of angular momentum. And I think there's all kinds of problems to what stars we can see in the sky, where we are in relation to the North Star, and how this our axis tilt is maintained as we go around the sun, and we're hurtling through the universe, being dragged along, or by the forces keeping us as all the planets spin around the sun, and the sun's flying through the universe. All these forces seem to be magically explaining all of this. I mean, even the speed of the rotation of the Earth. I mean, how that remains constant is also very strange.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in terms of it tumbling, you're right. I mean, if you think about it, if space was a vacuum and basically the Earth would have to be weightless, right? So if it's spinning and the axis is wobbling, then what's keeping that wobble from, doing a full, I don't know, 360-degree lateral rotation the other way? I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. There's just no way that the Earth should behave in such a way that it does in the model in a vacuum, with gravity. It just doesn't make sense. It's preposterous.
And that's even if you buy into their notion that there's this thing called gravity in the first place, which again, and we've spent a bit of time talking about this tonight. I know that a lot of people, especially if they're just hearing this for the first time, it'll be very hard for them to conceive that gravity isn't real because it's been such a part of their life. I mean, since they've been old enough to remember, they've believed that every time they've kicked a football, every time they've dropped a glass of water, every time something like that has happened, there's been this magical pulling force between the Earth and the object that's brought it down. That is their worldview in a literal sense. The notion that there's any other explanation will seem absurd to them because they have never really conceived of it. But I would ask those people who are listening to this podcast, and it's one of their first introductions to flat Earth discussion like this, to just try to imagine that maybe there's no magical force pulling your pen towards the ground. There's no magical pulling force that's pulling the football towards the ground. That's a simple case of density and with water buoyancy. Just try and imagine that and see if you can get your head around it. And if you can, and if you spend the time looking into this, that those of us on the panel and many in the live chat have spent looking into this, you'll probably eventually reach the point that I've reached right now, which is to realize that anyone who actually believes in this magical force of gravity, if they want to think that I'm crazy, that's fine by me, because as far as I'm concerned, they're believing in utterly ridiculous fairy tales. It's like believing in Santa. How come Santa's reindeer don't fall to the ground? You know what?
Right.
And some children will ask, like, okay, I don't have children. If I ever do, I don't think I'll teach them the Santa story. No offense to those who did teach their children that story. That's up to you. I don't think I would do that. But if I did, I would like to think that my son or daughter will be smart enough to at least ask the question, why do the reindeer not fall to Earth? Because even children know that things fall to Earth. So why doesn't Santa and his reindeer fall to Earth? And at least then, even though the child might be buying into the fairy tale, at least the child is asking questions of the fairy tale. Seems to me that most adults today, they don't ask questions of the explanation they've been given, and it's every bit as fanciful as reindeer flying through the sky. We need to press on to the next topic. Before we do, we've got more than 80 people watching live. I want to thank you guys all for coming out. If you've just joined us late, this is episode 8 of the Baller Skeptic Roundtable. We've got with us TheMorgile, Jonathan, TheMorgile, coming to us live from South Carolina. We thank you for joining us. We're into the second hour of the show today. It's meant to be a 2-hour show, and we wanted to spend a bit of time today looking at mass media programming. Now, Morgal, you've mentioned that you do work in marketing. You understand full well the power that the people who control the world have to program the minds of the masses. Do you want to spend a few minutes right now expanding upon your theories as to how they do that with us?
Yeah, sure. And just real quick, just hopping back to the last topic real quick, people say, so if you jump off a building, you're not going to fall to the earth because there's no gravity, right? No, when you jump off a building, and I will go on the record stating I would never, ever, ever do anything to hurt myself, but if you jump off a building, you've got a column of air going all the way up to the top of the atmosphere pushing down on you. So even though it's lighter, you are denser than the atmosphere, so you're going to find your way down towards the bottom, and all that mass of air is pushing down on you, causing to fall to the earth. Right. So in terms of the mass media programming, yeah, they've been laying it on pretty thick since, well, since TV was around, but even before then, books, before TV or the big screen, books were sort of the guiding force, if you could read. Going through the, quote, evolution of the programming, it's pretty much been the same. It's propaganda, it's subliminal suggestion, hypnotic suggestion. The advertisers of the world all use it, and the advertisers of the world could be anything from NASA to, soft drinks. So they've done a real good job. They've done a real good job of basically imprisoning people's minds into only subscribing to one single, quote, true, verifiable model of our universe, which is actually totally wrong. It's been irrefutably proved. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I wouldn't be, going live on air saying that, we live on an infinite plane if I hadn't basically checked it out first and verified it. So that's what everybody should do. You can't just listen to and absorb everything that's programmed into your mind through the idiot box of the television, or even the schooling systems, the federal schooling systems, which are indeed designed to make sort of a service class out of us. 50 cents is your change. Do you want fries with that? Or even, all walks of life are programmed to provide a service to the government, which is totally against what our, America, our country, was formed for. All right.
Well, what we're talking about here is the way that they can affect the minds of people. Do I remember correctly that you quoted Edward Bernays' propaganda in one of your videos, Morgal?
Yep.
Do you want to tell the listeners when you first became aware of Bernays' work? And I'll get a couple of quotes ready because people need to hear this. Let the listeners know when you first found out about this man who 90 years ago more or less told us the way that the world really runs.
Yeah, sure. I think I started getting interested in some, subliminal programming stuff. Started out with the Disney stuff. If you guys aren't familiar, Disney was a Freemason who was tied in very tightly with the military-industrial complex, of course secretly, but they would use all sorts of subliminal programming going back to the World Wars era, basically, well, I guess you could say tricking people into giving the government their money for war bonds. And so that I sort of got fascinated with it. You can see that the subliminal hypnotic suggestion has gotten bolder and bolder and bolder as the years have gone by, but most people just don't even notice it. A lot of the big budget movies that we see are indeed funded by, especially the ones that have anything to do with the military, are funded in part by military-industrial complex organizations. And these people at the top sort of do have a goal of dumbing us down and getting us to subscribe to certain ideals. Give you some examples. So, like, have you guys seen the new movie Noah with Russell Crowe?
I generally don't make it out to the cinemas these days. Matrix, have you caught Noah with Russell Crowe?
Yeah, I've seen it. It seems to be misrepresented. If I'm correct, it misrepresents the story about Noah, and there's a lot of these movies being put out at the moment. All kinds of movies, especially to do with propaganda movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, sort of ingrained in the plot of the movie is this total inversion of the story of Noah. And, if somebody that's not, and I'm not trying to get, religious in this debate, a point I wanted to make earlier is I am a Christian. I was a Christian before when I believed in the ball earth model. I'm a Christian now that I know the flat earth model is true. So, it's not a Christian thing. There's millions of Christians that, still believe in the globe earth. I would believe in the flat earth whether I was a, purple, purple communist. It doesn't matter. Facts are facts. But, back to the movie with Russell Crowe, yeah, it was a total inversion of the biblical story of Noah, and where basically the fallen angels, the Nephilim, were the ones who helped Noah, get out of the flood, which, the Great Flood was supposedly caused to eliminate the Nephilim. So it's just, there's all sorts of examples where the mass media, whether it's big budget movies or whether it's, commercials or NASA, the Apollo mission films that were faked, all of this stuff is designed to, get the masses to subscribe to a certain paradigm. And then the rest of the world sort of follows with herd mentality. Everybody wants to fit in. Nobody wants to be a black sheep. Nobody wants to stand up and say anything outside of the pre-approved box paradigm that's been sort of, shoveled into our minds by the mass media and, of course, the federal school system. Yep.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought Edward Bernays up there, Morgal. I talk about him all the time, not just, well, we're going to talk about him tonight, but I've spoken about him on the other shows that I do as well, and it bears repeating. Edward Louis Bernays, he lived from 1891 to 1995. He was an Austrian-American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, referred to in his obituary as the father of public relations, and he wrote his book Propaganda in 1928. Now let me read out a couple of quotes from that book. This is from 1928, and the reason why he's important is he was on the Committee of Public Information, which was used to propagandize Americans in World War I into believing that World War I was a good thing for them. You know, he was paid essentially to make people believe that there was something in it for them, that they were better off if they went and slaughtered other men and got slaughtered by the men who they'd never met and had no beef with. This was the guy who was put in charge because he knew how people's minds work. He was, of course, the nephew of Sigmund Freud as well. And let me read a quote from the book. It was, of course, the astounding success of propaganda during the war that opened the eyes of the intelligent few in all departments of life to the possibilities of regimenting the public mind. The manipulators of patriotic opinion made use of the mental cliches and the emotional habits of the public to produce mass reactions against the alleged atrocities, the terror, and the tyranny of the enemy. So they're still using those same methods 100 years later to convince us that wars on the other side of the world are somehow good for us. He said some other things as well. Quote, a presidential candidate may be drafted, in inverted commas, in response to overwhelming popular demand, in inverted commas, but it is well known that his name may be decided upon by half a dozen men sitting around a table in a hotel room. End quote. Again, this was written in the 1920s. Anyone can go and read it for themselves today. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what Bernays said. And again, Bernays was no crackpot. He was a man who was hired by people at the top levels to influence the public mind. And when you read what he says about how easy it was, for me, it's not hard to believe that they could convince a whole bunch of people who are actually on a flat plane that they're on a spinning ball. Most people are easily manipulated. And this guy was writing before TV became ubiquitous. Now they've got these boxes in everyone's houses where they can beam images at 30, 60 frames a second, depending on the set, into people's minds, condition their minds, and make them believe just about anything they want. So for me, the idea that they could convince us that we're on a different Earth to what we are on, not so hard to believe. Morgal, what say you?
Yeah, manufacturing of consent, totally agree. Wasn't Edward, didn't he also have something to do with making cigarette smoking like the cool, trendy thing to do for women when before it was sort of taboo?
Yeah, the torches of freedom. What the cigarette companies noticed was that they were missing out on half of their market because at the time it was considered a taboo for women to smoke. He was employed to change that, so he latched his wagon onto the then growing so-called women's rights movement, and he found a way to market it so that it was considered, well, if men won't let us smoke, that's part of what we would now call the patriarchal society. And so he organised a photo shoot. This is all off the top of my head, by the way. This isn't in my notes. He organised a photo shoot where a number of attractive women would be seen smoking in public. He got the press to be there to report on it, and the women were supposedly doing this as a stand against, women's oppression. And they were calling these cigarettes torches of freedom. The same Edward Bernays. And again, this is a guy who says you don't really elect your presidents, other men do. And it's actually very easy for us to manipulate your mind. And I guess for me, this is where it gets really interesting. He wrote that book and it was published. Anyone can get a copy from your library. I got my copy from the university library. I was a student at the time. This isn't a secret. It's not a secret that these people can and do manipulate people's minds. They even brag about it in books, and yet most people are none the wiser.
Yep, totally. And I think, going back to the group of secretive people doing things to change the world, if you go back a few years before Bernays wrote that, I think you said it was in 1920s, 1913, the Federal Reserve Bank was formed in secret due to, the pretext that was caused by the Great Depression. They used that, and I believe that was totally planned and executed. It was a bubble bust, same tactics they're using now, in order to cause the pretext for the central bank, which was expressly forbidden in the Constitution, but they squeaked it by going to, a few congressmen went to a secret meeting on Jekyll Island, and I think it was Jekyll Island, Georgia, during the Christmas break when all the other congressmen were wrapping presents from Santa. These 13 guys, and I believe it was headed by Rothschild, drafted the Federal Reserve Act, which essentially made this small group of people and their shareholders responsible for essentially inventing money out of thin air and loaning it to our government, which is exactly what people, you know, the people like Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson were totally opposed to, and they did it, and they did it with the help of the mass media outlets by, you know, causing all the hype because of the Great Depression, which was a terrible thing, where most of the country got totally poor. A few select people got very rich because they were, you know, sort of hedging bets against the economy like they do now, insider trading. But yeah, so they manufactured consent for the Federal Reserve, and now we're stuck on a globe world where these very people who are connected at the tip top of the pyramid, if you will, run things, and they even run our money. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you're referring to The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, and he writes about how in 1913, that's how the Federal Reserve in the US came about. Australia's, what we now call our Reserve Bank, followed not too long thereafter. Of course, the IRS came into existence in the same year as the Federal Reserve. Not a coincidence. And for any listeners, because we do attract listeners to this show, not just now live, but into the future, who maybe the flat Earth thing is one of the first conspiracies they've really dug into. For a lot of people, some of us get into it the other way. We find out about the hoaxes, and then we build our way up. Other people, this has changed their paradigms very quickly. So if this is all new to you, I'll provide links underneath this video on YouTube to copies of G. Edward Griffin's book and or website. Same with Edward Bernays, his book Propaganda. Strongly recommend you check those out. The one about money isn't necessarily directly related to the ball earth skepticism, but in many ways it's indirectly related. It's the same thing. The people who run the show know they can and do manipulate us, and so long as we keep our heads buried in the sand, they'll continue to do it. Matrix, we're going to move on to talking about NASA in a moment, but just wrapping up this topic of mass manipulation of people's minds through the televisions, through the schools. Any thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bernays, you know, he said that thoughts are not your own, that they were conjured up by, you know, this small group of men in a dark room, and you know, this is like the fundamental aspects of understanding, you know, the deception that's going on, you know, uncovering the media and the use of propaganda. I mean, you know, we're going to talk about NASA and, you know, maybe the filming of the moon landings, and you know, the Mars rover, you know, the press conference where they actually, you know, compare it to, you know, Americans got value for money, and you know, they were saying it was like a movie production. I mean, almost every Hollywood movie production company uses the globe, and you know, like for instance, Universal Pictures, you know, and it's this constant reinforcement of this programming, this idea again and again. It's everywhere. The globe image is everywhere.
Yeah, and I agree, and I don't think necessarily all the globes in the movies, which there's a lot to that. I don't think all of that is as deliberate as we think. People who are creative and, you know, coming up with logos or coming up with set dressings, they'll just you know, they'll pull things out of their mind that they think are interesting, and, you know, they'll put them in the set. I don't think it's necessarily, you know, maybe not, but I don't think it's necessarily they're putting all the globes in there to perpetuate the lie, although it does indeed perpetuate the lie. They're just doing it because that's their paradigm. That's what they've been sort of taught to believe their whole life, and so it's ingrained as a picture in our mind, but really that's all it is. The globe Earth is just a picture in our mind. It's not reality.
And I think it's a big part of the conditioning matrix. I agree with you. Since I noticed, or since I came to learn some of the things that I've learned about the Bohr model, anytime that I do have the television on or I'm near a TV and I'm paying attention to it, it's incredible the number of times that I see the globe. Now, some people will say that that's the what is that, the Texas rifleman fallacy or whatever it is, you know, when you're looking for it, you'll see it. Sure, I understand that. At the same time, though, I would encourage listeners, next time you're watching TV, which I hope that you don't do too often, see how many times you notice the globe. It seems to be in the news every time, you know, even the so-called alternative news, the fake alternative news, like our friends at InfoWars and Prison Planet. You'll see the ball everywhere. In fact, even on YouTube, some of the more prominent YouTube truthers seem to like using the globe or the ball. Now, it could be, as Morgal says, you know, just a coincidence or just a corollary of the Bohr model being implanted in our heads, and I think to an extent that's true. At the same time, I wonder how much of it is a deliberate attempt, and again, I encourage listeners always to think through these things themselves, notice it for yourself, and come to your own conclusions. We do need to move on to the next topic. Before we do, I'll just read out a couple of comments from the live chat. Ella says that her comment about gravity and love was facetious. We know that, Ella. The point that I was making was that your facetious explanation of how gravity works, how masses attract each other through love, to me is no more ridiculous than the notion that they attract each other merely through their mass, through some magical force called gravity. And I wasn't trying to pass your comment off as being serious, so please don't misunderstand me. Scully B. Crack, and an old friend of mine, in regards to the wobble, he says that the Earth wobbles because of rearrangements of mass deep inside the Earth. CAT scans prove this. And for me, that's the typical, that's what we were talking about earlier, Morgal, how people will make excuses for the Bohr model, and they'll just repeat the nonsense that they're taught at school clearly without putting too much thought into it. Tell me how far CAT scans, tell me how far deep CAT scans can see. Tell me how far deep humans have been into the crust of the Earth. We're told that we live on an Earth with a diameter of 26,000 miles, but how deep have humans actually been? And why would you believe a thing that they say about anything that's deeper, especially if we can't get deeper because the crust is too thick or too hot or whatever their excuse is why I can't get deeper? Why would you believe that their magic CAT scans can get any deeper? Why would you believe a thing these people say? If you want to believe it, that's fine, but you've probably come to the wrong place, Scully, because we don't believe that kind of nonsense unless they give us evidence.
Well, no, I think he's come to the right place because, and I brought this up before, a lot of times people will sort of, like you said, they will enact the programming, but when they question things, I think that's good because they've actually got their attention on the subject. But from my position is, it's been irrefutably proved that we do not live on a globe. So any proof that you can point to, you might want to scrutinize that with skepticism, okay, and follow the facts where they lead you. And you know, just because you can mention a CAT scan and say that it's proved something doesn't necessarily prove anything. And I would bet my bottom dollar that there's an explanation behind that theory of CAT scans that fits in perfectly with the flat Earth model or the infinite plane model.
You make a very good point, Morgal, and I would never turn anyone away from the show. With my friend Scully B. Kraken, you need to bear in mind this is a gentleman who believes that I am a CIA asset for doing this show and that I was sent here to destroy the truth movement by discrediting it, by mentioning that Sydney Siege, Sandy Hook, Boston bombings, they're all fake. And then when also questioning the Bohr model, that's discrediting by association. And there's actually a surprising number of people out there who believe this, Morgal. So when I dismiss people like Scully, it's not just because he regurgitates what he's told. Obviously, most of us have done that in the past up until relatively recently. That's not the issue. The issue is that some people are in the live chat simply to regurgitate the Bohr model because in their mind they're helping the truth movement by hanging onto the ball. And it's very sad to me.
If I could make a point, and I totally know what you mean. One of the ways I'm sort of a shill detector, and I'm not saying that guy's a shill, never met him, but one of the ways that I've been able to sort of determine who is a shill that's just going to regurgitate the pre-approved paradigm no matter what is if you can make a couple of valid rational points to a normal person, they're at least going to scratch their head and say, let me look into that, and either they will or they won't, at least. But if you make several rational, logical points to a person who says, no, you're lying, and it's because of this, and then you say, well, what, explain that, elaborate on that, how does that prove anything? And they'll just say, like, oh, well, I just proved it, see? And that's how, there's not a rational discussion with a shill. Now, again, it could be somebody that's deeply entranced into the programming, will just simply never look at the ball Earth skeptically, as they should. But on the other hand, if you can point to verifiable evidence that the Earth is not spinning, and it is also definitely not a globe, and it's verifiable by anyone who chooses to look at it, yeah, pretty much they're going to be a shill if they continue to post just nonsense after nonsense, avoid the facts, use ad hominem attacks. I don't know if that person does this, but so I definitely see where you're coming from, and I wasn't trying to undermine you there.
Oh, no, you're right, mate. You're the guest, and we love having you on board. And with Scully, cause here's the thing, I don't think there are as many shills out there as certain people want to believe, and I don't think that Scully is a shill. I've known of his work for a little while, and unfortunately, there's this group of people out there who consider themselves to be the truth community, and their leaders very early on started planting this seed that any so-called truthers or hoaxbusters who also talk about the ball not really being a ball, They were sent here to discredit all of us. And as you know full well from your marketing, Morgal, if you can plant the seeds early, some people, even otherwise intelligent people, those seeds will take root, and it'll be very hard for them to ever get rid of the weeds that sprout out, if you like. And I think Skull is quite genuine. He's actually in the live chat to push the ball Earth, because in his mind, that's also helping get out the word about the other smaller hoaxes. And my reply would be, if you can believe in the smaller hoaxes, if you know the importance of the smaller hoaxes, consider for a moment just how important it is that if the Bohr model is a hoax, that we investigate that possibility properly and thoroughly and fairly and honestly, and we admit when there are problems like the lack of curvature, like the horizon rising to eye level, like all of the easily debunked myths like Coriolis effect and the Foucault pendulum and all of these silly things that we're taught to prove.
Oh, it's never ending. It's never ending. The proof is never ending. The flat Earth, the infinite plane model is the truth. You can't debunk the truth. And I would just say to that, to that listener, I appreciate you listening and debating, but you really need to scrutinize the globe model. I know you think we're all crazy, but honestly, I'm a normal person. I've just sort of discovered the truth in the last few months, and the only difference between you and I is I scrutinize the globe model with rational, scientific thought, and that's something I haven't done since I was 4 or 5 years old. We're taught not to scrutinize the globe model because it's a known fact. But in reality, you're totally deceived, totally misled. We're not trying to deceive people. Me personally, I would never, ever, ever, and I swear to God, I would never try to mislead anyone. This is the truth, and I hope that you're able to use some discernment.
Well said. Well, we don't spend too much time on that. And again, to all of the listeners, many people who are listening to us are just as skeptical of the ball as we are. There are other people who are listening who are simply curious about this. And if you still believe in the ball, but you're open-minded to hearing this kind of conversation and truly questioning it, then you're more than welcome to be a part of the show. I don't never want to make you feel like you're not welcome. We love having you on board. And if you can give us any good explanations for some of the problems that we come up with, post them underneath this video on my channel, John the Pond. Send them to me in a private message if you don't want people to see them publicly. I'm always open-minded to getting other explanations, to getting reasons for the beliefs that you have. And that's what this is supposed to be about. I mean, if there were a real truth community, it would be a collaborative effort where we wouldn't tell each other which topics were taboo and which topics were okay. We'd say, well, what are your beliefs? What's the evidence based on? Well, now I will analyze your evidence, and between us, we'll come together to realize some kind of truth. Unfortunately, what's happened is that certain gatekeepers have told their little flock, no, there are taboo topics, and anyone who talks about them has been sent here to discredit us. And when you take a step back and realize what's going on, those gatekeepers are sick people, and they'll get what's coming to them. Don't you worry about that. You don't need to believe in karma. You don't need to believe in God or a creator or Gaia or any of these things. All you need to simply understand is that there is right, there is wrong, there is truth, there are falsehoods, and in time these things will all take care of themselves. I'm very confident of that. We're fast coming towards the end of the show, so we better press on. I want to spend a bit of time.
Could I add? There is up and down as well.
Yeah, which they take away from us at a young age. They tell us that they tell us when we're a little kid, when we're a little child. I try not to use the word kid anymore, but they tell us when we're a little child that people on the other side of the ball, they're upside down. I mean, I live in Australia, so on the balls that they show us, they say we're at the bottom end and the Americans are at the top, and they say, compared to the Americans, we're upside down. And little children are like, what do you mean? Well, there are people on the other side of the ball, and they're upside down compared to us. And compared to them, they think that we're upside down. So what you think is down is really up, and what they think is up is really down. And so at a young age, they convince us that down is up and up is down. And from the point that they do that, we lose all notion of our senses, we lose all faith in our own senses, and we come to believe everything that they tell us. Is it any wonder that they can give us these ridiculous photos of men supposedly on the moon, and the average sleeper goes along with it? The average sleeper gave leave of their senses when they were 5 years old, when they believed that up was down and down was up. It wasn't their fault. They were manipulated by the system. And that's what we're trying to talk about on this show. So anyone who can't see that, you have my pity, and I hope that in time you'll come to see you have been misled, but it's not by us. We need to move on to NASA, Morgal. Speaking of people who mislead, can you tell us in a few moments the main reasons why you believe that NASA are a giant fraud?
Sure, and I'll sort of just touch on that last point that you had, up is down, down is up. That really is the foundation. If you study Satanism, which is a lot of people worship Satan, it's true, it's a religion, it's accredited in the U.S. Army, but they believe, you know, there is no real moral right or wrong. It's all relative, and whatever you decide is good or evil, then that's what it is. So yeah, subscribing to the globe model, you know, sets us up perfectly for this Luciferian mind frame of relativism, right? So, but yeah, NASA, segueing into that, the founders and some of the chief proponents of NASA were indeed shipped over from Nazi Germany right after the Second World War, and spearheaded all sorts of government programs like NASA. Werner von Braun is a good example. So we've got Nazis running NASA, and I'm not going to go into the debate of you know, why they would do that. The fact is they did. Operation Paperclip is a known fact. And so if we can just all agree that the Nazis were supposed to be our enemies during World War II, then, you know, it's sort of hard for me to understand why the government would bring Nazis over through Operation Paperclip and other such operations to allow Nazis to sort of run different shows, especially like NASA. But if you study it and sort of look at it with an open mind, you'll see that the Nazis were very, very advanced with propaganda. The American government prior to Pearl Harbor was very much aligned with the Nazi ideology of fascism, as well as things like eugenics and propaganda. They were, you know, sort of peers, right? And so when NASA was started, it was, I believe, inherently started as a deceptive organization, which sort of just been proved, right? It was at least deceptive. And so, you know, just by its very inception, NASA is sort of suspect. NASA has unlimited budget, and they have technologies and you know, the mass media outlets all right along with them. But there's certain things that NASA can assert as fact, which we just simply cannot verify. We can verify that a lot of the footage and pictures they've sent us were fake. You know, there are things that we can verify that NASA is a deceptive organization, and that they've been put in place to essentially take our money, which they've cost us billions, maybe trillions of dollars over the last several decades. And ultimately, they've taken our money and used it against us to imprison our minds on the globe.
I know people who will sell vacuum cleaners to old ladies for $50,000 a year plus commission. If I gave you $18 billion, how many liars would you need to employ to pull off some of the hoaxes that NASA have pulled off? Matrix, you've been quiet for a little while. I apologize for that. Feel free to have the floor for a moment to talk about NASA and their blatant and disgusting fakery.
Yeah, I mean, you know, once you get into it, you start off with the moon landings, perhaps, and you know, start looking at the different flaws in the videos and images, and you know, this you start to see how it was a production, a movie, and you know how they're using that, and you know, everything NASA since then seems to have been you know, faked one way or another, and you know, the lies or the deception, if you like, keeps advancing, and have to keep having to come up with new ideas, new concepts. You know, in the invention of the ISS space station, and you know, to the other programs, you know, exploring the universe. I mean, NASA seems to start all the way back. I think it was born out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and who was, I think it was started by Jack Parsons, who was an occultist and magician, and you know, these, you know, related to L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology, and Aleister Crowley, you know, one of the most famous black magicians. And so, you know, NASA really has this whole occult aspect to it as well, even down to the naming of the missions. So.
Oh yeah, definitely occult, or occult and Nazi origins of NASA, and you know, the Nazis were very much into the occult too. And so yeah, but yeah, Jack Parsons, he was a well-known, I guess, Luciferian Satanist, ritual magician, follower of Aleister Crowley. Wasn't he the guy that originally invented solid fuel, or am I wrong?
Yeah, he was one of the first to come up with this rocket technology.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, you know, and you're right. I mean, naming the missions, it all ties into you know, ritual, you know, esoteric ritualism. The dates that they use to launch the missions, you know, all of it is very much, if you're initiated or if you understand sort of the whole hierarchy, yeah, it's all definitely tied. And it seems like, you know, all the conspiracies, and I don't call them theories because a lot of them are true. If you follow the money and you follow the motive and you follow the evidence to the tip top, they all sort of end at the similar place, right?
Yeah, I'll just interject there quickly. You are a very popular man, Morgal. We're up to almost 90 people watching live as we speak right now. Thanks to all of them for coming out. I think that's our highest ever live view count for the show. So, Morgal, we'll have to make you a more regular thing. In the live chat, Crazy RSS says that the implications of the fake moon landing are so huge that the failure of people to even think about it are scary. And in many ways, I can see where he's coming from. Gav Nas says that the first step is to turn off the TV. Of course, many people, I mean, let me think about how old my father is. He would have been a teenager when the moon landings, when the moon hoax was pulled off, and whether he watched it live at school or he saw it at someone else's house or he just heard about it, he would have grown up in a generation where most people would have just completely believed everything they saw on the TV, and in many ways, I can't blame them. They didn't have access to the internet the way that we do now. I can now sit there if I feel like a bit of a laugh and go back through the archive footage, which is available on YouTube for people to see, of the moon landings, and I can sit there and have a good chuckle because it's so amusing. So long as I don't remember to myself, so long as I don't remind myself, there are still people out there who to this day completely believe it's real, Morgal.
Yep. Oh yeah. Because, and the thing is, and I think I've touched on this, you know, maybe not well enough in some of my videos, but people are inherently trusting. Okay, people don't try to, like, you know, lie and deceive people. People are decent. People are honest. You know, most people. So they just really don't understand how certain groups of people could get together, you know, just to deceive people out of, you know, for whatever end. It's just unthinkable. And so, you know, to those people that believe that those old, you know, moon landing videos are real, it's just because they're trusting. I wouldn't say they're gullible. They just don't see the, you know, the government having any reason to lie to them. But, and, you know, that's another thing, motive. I mean, why lie about this whole thing? But when you start getting into the infinite plane model, it makes a lot of sense. It's a control mechanism.
Sure. I mean, many of them think, why would the government lie to me? The government is my friend. The government gave me school. It made me really smart. It gives me health care. I'm very lucky to have the government taking half of the money that I earn. And I'm very lucky to have the government knock down my door and take me away in the middle of the night if I dare to grow my own medicine in my own backyard. I'm very lucky. Why would they ever lie to me about a space program that costs $18 billion a year, Matrix?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, this gets into the whole, you know, NASA and pictures of Earth and the lack thereof, you know, and how they like to be pushing this, you know, this new Earth photo and so on. You know, it has some subliminal in it. I'm not sure if Morgal's aware of that. You know, how it says sex spelled out in the clouds, and yeah, it's all a big production. I mean, they, you know, they come up with.
Are you talking about the one that came out of the Russian from Russia a couple of days ago or whatever?
Yeah, it's the Discover satellite from 1,000,000 miles away. They're apparently taking a picture of Earth.
Yeah, I looked at it for a second. It looked ridiculous, but no, I hadn't studied it.
Okay. Well, I mean,
what were you saying? So there are some subliminals in that too?
Yeah, definitely. People should check that out. I mean, you know, the whole NASA, you know, the reason why, you know, a big part of the reason why we believe we're on a spinning ball is because of the photos of Earth from space that we've been fed since the moon landings, and you know, this is a big part of the deception and the whole NASA question. Because without those photographs, you know, alleged photographs and you know, composite images, you know, there was really not much proof to say that we were on a spinning ball.
Yeah, well, that's totally right. And people say, oh, we've known for 500 years the Earth was a globe. That's really inaccurate because you know, it was still being debated in the late 1800s. Rowbotham wrote, you know, Zetetic in the, I think it was like in the 1890s. So, you know, this was still a hotly debated theory up into the 1900s. Then, of course, it seems like we had the takeover, you know, by whomever's running the Federal Reserve and whomever's running the political system. It wasn't that long after, in the 1930s, where they went to explore the Antarctic. You know, that was Richard Byrd, and if you look into his interviews, you'll find some really interesting stuff that he mentions, like large mass of land beyond the South Pole and that sort of thing. But Richard Byrd was also one of the first proponents of the hollow Earth theory, by the way. But yeah, I kind of got off on a tangent. What was the question?
Relating to the whole NASA, you know, without NASA's photos of Earth from space, we wouldn't. You know,
Oh yeah, of course. So around 1930s, we had the 1950s, we had the Antarctic Treaty, which made it illegal to travel to the Antarctic, you know, by anyone really wanting to explore and go beyond. Sure, you can take some guided tours. Sure, you can go there for scientific research with the strict supervision and oversight of the military. But all in all, Antarctica is off limits. And so, you know, without us being able to visit there, we can just assume that they're correct and they're not lying to us, and we can just go merrily on our way on the globe Earth that doesn't exist.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the 1972 Apollo 17 photograph is the one we've all seen for like the last 43 years. I mean, it's been actually 43 years since we've had this last official photograph of Earth, and you know, there's a whole curious aspect to the timing of the release of this image with what's going on the internet right now with the flat Earth debate.
Yep. And to me, you know, honestly, I know a lot of people are reserved about it, and it is still a debate, but yeah, to me, there's no question in my mind. It's the obvious truth, and the most difficult thing is really just getting people to look at the topic rationally. Again, I'm guilty of the same thing. When I was first introduced to the topic, I laughed it away as the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard of, and didn't think about it again for a couple of months. And then I spent, you know, again, about a week sort of studying it, looking through it, trying to, you know, use my best discernment. And all the verifiable evidence proves that the entire infinite space model and the entire globe Earth model is wrong.
Matrix on mute there again. We've quickly come towards the end of the show, Morgal. It's meant to be a 2-hour show now. It's 10 to midnight here in Brisbane on Wednesday. I'm happy to go a little bit longer if needs be, but I know that at the start of the show I could hear your wife saying that she was amazed that you took up the offer to come on the show at such late notice. Are you able to stick around a little bit longer, or do we need to wrap up by 2 hours?
No, I got all day. I'm my own boss, so you know I can spend all day with you if you want.
Well, then the plan is we'll make it a 2.5-hour show, which will give us enough time to have a general discussion section at the end. I just want to wrap up this topic to do with NASA. And for me, even if it gets to the stage where in 2 months or 4 months, the research that I'm doing leads me to believe that we actually are on a ball, that I was wrong, I hadn't seen the good evidence yet, I'd simply looked at all the bad evidence, and so I dismissed it, and I go back to believing in the ball, that's fine. I don't think it's possible that I'll ever go back to believing that man walked on the moon in 1969. The footage is utterly ridiculous, and for me, one of the good things about this baller skepticism that has come along all of a sudden in the internet world is it's encouraged me to go back and look at NASA properly, which I hadn't done. And I think there's a lot of people who are stuck in the so-called hoax-busting paradigm on YouTube, where they do break down Sandy Hook or Boston bombings as the obvious frauds and hoaxes that they were, but they don't look at this much bigger and much more significant hoax that is NASA. And it's not just the moon landings, it's the Mars rover, it's the passage of Pluto, all of this stuff. I never noticed until I started doing this research that all of the photos that you see in the mainstream press about the things that NASA does, all of the photos on NASA's own website, they're all CGI. There's meant to be thousands of satellites up there, and all the photos are CGI. And I'm at the point now where I think the people who run the show know full well what they're doing. This is a fairy tale that they're giving us. They're giving people this false fairy tale. Now, I've got a video coming up on my channel, John the Bond. I'll have it finished by tomorrow. Yeah, just yesterday here in Australia, there was a poll that was released which found that of the 3 major parties in this country, that the Greens Party, which is, I don't want to bore people with the politics of Australia, but the Greens get about 10 or 15% of the vote, usually the young progressive people who think they're environmentalists. It found that 75% of them believe that there is intelligent extraterrestrial life. Now, I went along to Reddit where people discuss these kinds of things, and I saw a whole bunch of people celebrating this, obviously Greens voters, that this was a good thing, that this showed how smart they all were, and they were citing the Drake's equation, D for dog, R-A-K-E-S.
Yeah.
The Drake's equation, it seems to me like when I was a kid, X-Files was a show with a cult following, but it was a fringe show. People who openly believed in aliens were crazy, whereas now that seems to be normal, and I'm only 27. So I'm talking 20 years is all it's taken.
Oh, yeah, manufacturing of consent, yep.
That's absolutely what it is. So if I have witnessed that in my... And this poll was released yesterday. I still can't quite get over it. In fact, even the Conservative Party, which you would think would be harder to persuade this way, more than 50%, according to this poll, believe in intelligent life, outside of Earth. And we're not talking about a creator. We're talking about, other beings that, probably look like us. Do you know what I mean? More than 50%. Right. Now, if I can witness, just in the 20 years that I've been old enough to remember this kind of thing, aliens go from fringe to apparently a mainstream belief all of a sudden, it's not hard for me to believe that maybe just a couple of generations ago, people didn't believe in the ball the way that they do. They'll tell us that 500 years ago, people made up their minds. They'll tell us that. What difference will we know? Most people my age probably think that people have always believed in aliens. What difference would they know? Thanks to things like the Drake's equation. So for me, this notion of, people have known for hundreds of years it's a ball, I think that's nonsense. I think that the photos that NASA have supposedly given us have played a huge role in shaping people's minds. And once you understand that NASA is a 100% fraudulent organization, the notion that we've been lied to about the ball becomes much easier to accept. Morgal, what say you?
Yeah, definitely agree. You made so many points. I should have jotted it down.
I've got a bad habit of doing that sometimes, Morgal.
No, you're good.
While you're just trying to gather your thoughts there, I'll throw to Matrix. Sorry, Matrix, I've been a bad tonight. I haven't thrown to you enough. When we haven't got David Weiss interjecting every moment, I keep forgetting to throw to Matrix. For those who are tuning in late, David's normally with us. He's out at a music festival today, and he sent me through a quick message. He said that the circumference of the Earth is 25,000 miles, but the diameter is 10 miles. And I strongly encourage people who haven't already done this to look into how far humans have dug. They tell us that there's a molten core in the middle of the Earth, and we believe that because we saw photos of it in textbooks at school. But then you find out humans haven't dug a fraction of the distance of the supposed ball. How the hell would they know what's in the middle of the Earth? I'm getting sidetracked again. Matrix, I'll go to you. I think people's minds have been shaped by the NASA photos. Exposing NASA as a fraud they are is a very important thing to do, and I'm glad that we're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, officially, the deepest anyone has drilled apparently is 8 miles deep in Russia. So, we really don't know what exactly is below that. So, they come up with these various theories of iron core, molten core, and all this stuff, but they really, can't tell. They don't know. I mean, this whole idea of a CAT scan, penetrating the Earth through thousands of miles to the center and being able to discover it seems extremely far-fetched. And so, that poll that you mentioned just now, that whole the poll result about people believing in aliens, that is quite surprising on one level. Unsurprising on another because of the programming that's the way the media and the movie industry and the news media promote alien stories or possible alien sightings, and this seems to be getting to a peak level again.
Well, and I finally remembered the point I was going to make, and I've got my handy little notepad here. So you guys make a lot of good points, and I agree with you on a lot of levels. But talking of aliens, there are a lot of people that believe we're visited by aliens coming from another star system, and they can somehow fold space-time so they don't have to travel, through space for millions of years and find us. So my take on that is, again, and I fully subscribe to the infinite plane model where there are probably other, quote, solar systems carving other puddles into the otherwise infinite plane. You can't disregard things like the Phoenix Lights. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but something like 10 or 20,000 people in Phoenix, Arizona saw a huge, miles, in diameter, triangular shaped ship fly overhead totally silently. Now, whether this is the government playing tricks on us, you know, who knows? Maybe it's a hologram, maybe it really is some extraterrestrial. But in the flat Earth model, such a thing, and I'm not saying I believe in aliens, but in the flat Earth model, such a thing is theoretically possible. Okay, in the globe Earth model, it's theoretically impossible to have quote-unquote aliens, and even if they could somehow travel here and find us, they wouldn't look anything like us. They'd be, you know, we'd have more in common with tomato than we would with space alien. But, you know, if you factor in the flat Earth model, it definitely makes extraterrestrials, you know, skipping over their retaining wall and landing over here theoretically possible. So, you know, there are a lot of people, and thanks to shows like, you know, Ancient Aliens, people believe that the aliens created us, which is, you know, totally contrary to, well, lots of things, but not to get into that. But if you believe in aliens, then you really need to consider the flat Earth model because it makes them theoretically possible.
Well, I tell you what, we've accidentally segued into general discussion because I did want to bring this up with you, Morgal. I love the videos that you made. One of the things that I took issue with, and again, we should be allowed to take issue with each other's models and videos, and it should be collaborative, and gentlemen have disagreements over these things, and then hopefully one of us can convince the other. If not, we still respect each other as men. That's the way it's supposed to be, so don't take any of this the wrong way. I'm sure that you won't. Sure. Talking about the aliens, I wanted to bring that up with you. Before I do, let me just read out this report, and for people who are watching live or on the video on delay, you can see this on the video. For those who are listening on MP3, I'll read this out. This is an Essential report from July 28th, so a couple of days ago, and Essential are one of the polling companies here in Australia, and the question is, do you think it is likely or unlikely that intelligent life exists somewhere else in the universe? And they've broken it down into Labor, Liberal National, and the Greens. For those, Labor is not too dissimilar to the Labor Party in Britain. The Liberal Nationals are our so-called Conservative Party, so they're almost like your Democrats and your Republicans in a rough sense. Then you've got the Greens, like I said, they get 10 to 15% of the vote, and between the three of them, they get like 90% of the vote at elections, if you believe the figures, and I do, but that's another story for another day. And the question is, like I said, do you think it's likely or unlikely that intelligent life exists somewhere else? For Labor, total likely was 2/3, total unlikely 1/5, obviously some undecided. For the Conservatives, 54% were likely, 35% said unlikely. For the Greens, and again, these are usually your supposedly educated, progressive, younger people, 71% say likely, 18% say unlikely. And then they break it down even further into very likely, likely, unlikely, very unlikely. And here's where it gets really concerning. The Greens, a third of Greens voters, and bear in mind, I went to university, most of my friends and acquaintances from university would be Greens voters to this day. 1/3 of them say very likely, another 39% say likely. So young people are completely convinced there's intelligent life, alien life elsewhere in the universe. But even the Conservatives, even the people, these are generally 50, 60-year-old people who vote Conservative in Australia, probably no dissimilar to other countries out there listening. Even amongst them, 20% say very likely, another 34% say likely. Matrix, to me, this just shows a lot of the older people in Australia are sitting down and watching their so-called History Channel.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, what evidence is there? What hard evidence? It's a lot of people speculating about, these beings and, how they interact with us and whether it's, a supernatural element of things. To me, there's a big part of science fiction has played a big role in this. From like Star Trek, and curiously, the original series with William Shatner that ended like 2 weeks before the moon landing. So you had like a few seasons of Star Trek, and then boom, the moon landings. I mean, it's like this whole predictive programming of the universe, and so many of those ideas from Star Trek have been introduced. Even down to things like the mobile phone. So the fundamental aspect of people's life and the experience of technology or limited technology, it's all encompassing, I think. So I mean, then you've also got films like Star Wars, and these two things have had a big effect on, I guess, maybe more of the male population than the female population.
Are you guys familiar with the War of the Worlds hoax in America? I guess it was in the 50s or so.
I am, but do you want to explain to the listeners who might not be aware, Morgal, of what that was all about?
Yeah, so and I can't think of the guy's name who wrote it. Maybe if one of you guys has internet, you could clarify on that. But
Awesome world.
Arson, there you go. Well, so what they did was they took, it was a radio program that was designed or presented as such to be a news broadcast, a news bulletin, emergency alert over all the radios in a certain, confined area. And what they told everyone is that the world was literally being under attack by space aliens, landing with flying saucers and abducting people and taking over the world. They did it on the radio, and everybody in that region, I guess it was a town or a region, I probably should have had my facts together first, but you can research it. Everybody literally believed that our world had been taken over by aliens. And so, this seemed to me as sort of a test to see, how well will people believe things that are asserted to them as a fact in a news type, format, even if it's just totally contrived. And so leading up to the Apollo missions, you had a lot of this stuff. I mean, look at the old shows, Lost in Space, and, all the books and theories, and you've got Newtonian physics and all these different things drilled into the paradigm leading up to the moon landings. And so, the moon landings were sort of a nail in the coffin of any rational debate because, there's the picture, it's a sphere, see?
Yeah, we're talking here about the War of the Worlds. Sorry, sometimes I have to check the live chat. We've got 90 people watching live, so I'm writing down the comments as we go. And yeah, so the War of the Worlds, I'm not sure if it was 1950s. Matrix might have had the correct information there. But from what I remember of this story is that the radio, people hearing the story over the radio, was enough for them to believe that something was happening. And again, the point I make to people is the TV is ubiquitous now. It's everywhere. And I think those of us who've grown up with the TV everywhere, it's hard for us to understand the influence that TV can have on our minds. But whether you believe that humans have existed for a couple hundred years, a couple thousand, or millions, as the evolutionists claim, we never had televisions beaming 30 images a second into our minds. We never adapted to be able to deal with that. This is a very powerful machine, perhaps the most powerful machine that man has ever had to use against his fellow man to convince his mind of things. And if you read works like Sun Tzu, Art of War, you understand that warfare isn't about bombs, it isn't about swords, it isn't about guns, it isn't even about death. It's about subduing your enemy. It's about controlling people, controlling resources, winning, if you can, by convincing them through propaganda rather than having to ever lift a fist in anger. And if you don't understand that people who control the TVs are your enemies and they are using the TV against you as a weapon, then you're not paying attention. And they've used these TVs, flickering 30 frames per second, to convince us of all kinds of things, including alien life. Now, I understand, Morgal, that you might subscribe to aliens. Another shout out for our old mate David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole. He has this thing that he calls puddle theory, and in his estimation, if puddle theory and aliens make more sense than the spinning ball expanding universe and aliens. He thinks that if you want to believe in aliens, the puddle theory makes better sense than the spinning ball model. Morgal, what do you make of this, that aliens might be real, but they'd still make more sense on the flat model than the ever-expanding universe?
Yeah, that's exactly my point. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say I subscribe to belief in aliens. It could just be, the government pulling another hoax. But if you look back into history, you will find several different situations where you can see things that look like UFOs in ancient paintings or cave drawings. But, that's besides the point. The point is if you do believe in aliens, if there's the caveat, if you do believe in them, then it's only plausible on the infinite plane puddle theory, right? Because they're not traveling millions of light years. They're just coming from maybe 100 miles or 10,000 miles, but certainly not, 500 billion miles or whatever, right? So yeah, I agree. I think it's plausible on the flat Earth or infinite plane model, wherein and going back to the Art of War, yes, I have read that. It was really interesting, and you're right. And I think one of the main points of that is without the consent of the people, you can't do anything as leaders. You have to have everyone in agreement. Now, most people are just simply not manipulative and power hungry, so they're sort of easily led astray. It's the psychopaths and the ones that crave power and the ones that want to manipulate people to their ends. Those are the ones who, by definition, end up in control because they lust after control. You don't have average people worrying about their children lusting after control. So who do you get in control? Well, ultimately you get the psychopaths. So the Art of War was beautifully written. I really enjoyed reading that. But yeah, I did glean sort of the same thing that you did, that they sort of have to have the consent of the people to do anything. And I believe that the founders of America knew this. You know, they knew that we couldn't be divided. We had to be sort of separate from the central banks. We had to be unified. There had to be checks and balances, which are all gone. And now we're just simply manipulated using, the mass media outlets and subliminal hypnotic suggestion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we're into the general discussion section now. I'll throw to you in a moment there, Matrix. We've probably got about 15 or 20 minutes left, and then we'll start to wrap the show up. There's a few comments that I wanted to read out. Lord Rollo says that he was in the womb back in 1969, and he even had a feeling back then that people were being had. Adam Bravo says that the flat Earth research is challenging at first, but ultimately beneficial if you are persistent. And I get where Adam's coming from, that it can be a bit of a mind warp at first. For me personally, I've found every moment of this fascinating, and I've learned so much about not only what I think is really going on, but also the official story. So either way, I think I'm better off. I strongly encourage people to do their own research. Don't believe a single thing that I say or that Matrix says, and dare I speak for you, Morgal, what Morgal says. Do your own research, come to your own conclusions. The biggest problem we've got is that people haven't been doing that for far too long, 50 years, 100 years, maybe longer, who knows. Nathan Ramos says, I get a lot of what you guys are saying, but what bothers me is why after all this time and different countries' people involved, has nobody blown the whistle or somebody shown some proof? Well, on the contrary, Nathan, I would argue that they have done exactly that. A number of books were released in the late 1800s by Zetetic Astronomy, Zetetic Astrology were the names of the books, people like Samuel Rowbottom. There was a book called 100 Proofs the Earth is a Globe. In fact, I've got these books, I've printed out copies of them, they're on my desk right now, and I'm slowly but surely getting through them. People have been talking about this. But what's happened is, for some reason, over the last 100 years, and we've touched on and implied and speculated about why this might be the case, for the last couple of generations, nobody's questioned it. But people were questioning it. They have been for a long time, and that's what we're trying to do on this show, is encourage people to question it, come to their own conclusions. Prometheus says, Jono, did you get the Sunday Sessions episode 16 back up? Check out my main channel, and you'll see that I'm working on uploading certain sections of that to my backup channel. So just go to John the Bond, check that out for yourself. And Sci Obstacle says, they don't call it programming on the TV for nothing. I couldn't agree more. Matrix, you've been a little bit quiet tonight. We're into the general discussion section. I know you've got a couple of questions you wanted to throw Morgal. I've got a couple of questions from the live chat that I want to throw him. I'll throw to you there, Matrix, and I'm going to finish off this bowl of vegetables that's just been sitting there cold for the last half an hour.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, I just mentioned Lord Rollo in the chat said, don't forget Doctor Who. And I couldn't agree more. His Time Machine. I mean, H.G. Wells is the author of that book, The Time Machine, and also, the War of the Worlds was written by H.G. Wells, but on radio it was a part of a radio drama series, and Orson Welles was the actor and narrator of that, and it caused a widespread fear and panic, and it could be considered a trauma-based mind control event. Where they use fear to control people, and also curiously that airing was on the 30th of October 1938, and that was Halloween. So there seems to have been some occult aspect to this. What are your thoughts on that?
Indeed, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So other questions I wanted to ask you. I wanted to, in your videos you talk a lot about the
Coriolis effect. An object in motion appears to be deflected from its course, as if a force is pulling it sideways. To demonstrate this point, let's imagine a game of catch being played by two people on a merry-go-round that spins like the Earth, but is flat. Without rotation, the ball appears to follow a straight path from thrower to catcher. Imagine the ball is tossed from the center to someone at the edge. With rotation, the ball still travels in a straight line in space, but because the catcher is moving, the ball misses. From the vantage point of the catcher, the ball appears to curve away. The direction of apparent motion is to the right, when following the path of the ball. Now the ball is thrown the other way. Because the thrower is moving, the ball has a velocity component to the right. The motion of the ball appears deflected to the right, and the ball misses the catcher again. Let's look at a throw across the merry-go-round. Both people move with the merry-go-round. The ball is thrown. Although it flies straight, it appears to be deflected from its original path. Apparent deflection increases as the ball travels farther. In the southern hemisphere, rotation is clockwise when viewed from over the pole. Again, the ball follows a straight course, but its apparent flight path is diverted. This time, the effect is to divert the motion to the left. On Earth, all free-moving objects, including masses of air, are subject to the Coriolis effect. In the northern hemisphere, objects are diverted to the right, as viewed from the direction of original movement. In the southern hemisphere, the deflection is to the left.
Yeah, the Coriolis effect is supposedly the the wind that cannot be measured, that rotates in opposite directions depending on which hemisphere or which side of the globe you're on. It just doesn't make any sense. It's been disproved. If you think of it this way, an artilleryman, ask any artilleryman, do they figure the spin of the Earth or the Coriolis effect into firing artillery? No, they don't, because there is no such thing. The air is mostly stationary. The air sort of acts like a fluid. Okay, it's a gas, but it sort of acts like a fluid on a massive scale. And so if all of the wind or all of the air was spinning in conjunction with the Earth 1,000 miles per hour towards the east near the equator, then in order to subscribe to that, you need to first subscribe to the fact that a 20 mile per hour westbound wind is actually a 980 mile per hour eastbound wind. Furthermore, if a westbound flight would face 1,000 mile per hour headwind, and an eastbound flight would have, it'd enjoy a 1,000 mile per hour tailwind. Simply put, there are no 1,000 mile per hour winds on our world. The fastest wind ever recorded was about 302 miles per hour in a tornado. So the Coriolis effect is just another one of those theories that's been used to prove the other theory that was used to prove the other theory that was used to prove the original theory, which none of them have been proved. It's all just theory. And so the Coriolis effect is just one more layer of insanity. I mean, think about it this way. So with the spin of the Earth, just put that aside for a second. Okay, it's 1,000 mile per hour eastward spin. But you also have to imagine that the Earth is orbiting around the sun, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's very fast, many thousands of miles per second around the sun. Okay, so you've got that motion. But on top of that, you've got the sun supposedly orbiting the magnetic center of the galaxy at a much even faster rate. Okay? And then, of course, you've got the galaxy, which is also, all of that motion inside of that galaxy is also hurling through space, something like 1.34 million miles an hour. Okay? So if gravity is so weak that it only affects large bodies, then what is causing any artillery or any projectile fired into the air that is no longer connected to the Earth? Because remember, gravity only affects large bodies, right? So what's causing those projectiles not to just go flying off into space a gazillion miles an hour? And I know people are going to say, well, it was going that fast before. But yeah, it was going that fast before. But once the cannon or the artillery is fired, okay, that's some other force acting on that cannonball, then the Earth is going to start traveling, 1,000 miles an hour, around the sun, and the sun is also going to move however many thousands of miles in that couple of seconds where the ball's in the air, and the galaxy is going to be hurled through space, 1,000,000 miles an hour or 1,000,000 miles in that second. So, again, there's no logic to why this projectile isn't doing all sorts of crazy maneuvers when you fire it. It's just another reason why gravity is preposterous and does not fit with the science. And we already went over the difference in weight at the North Pole versus the equator, right?
Yeah. I mean, this whole idea, like the Earth is spinning and the Coriolis effect. I mean, so many of us have heard that water goes down plug holes, and we learn this at a young age, and they make videos about it. But once you start to look into them, you realize it's a myth, and literally stated as a myth and hard to prove as a constant rotation, different rotation in different hemispheres. It leads you to the sniper rifle argument, the artillery fire, the movement of hurricanes and storms, and you start to look into it, and something like whether the Earth is the atmosphere is fixed, and the speeds that would generate, and there seems to be a lot of contradictions in these theories like gravity and Coriolis effect.
Right. Well, so another thing you can point out about it is so the atmosphere above my head, all the way to the tippy top of the atmosphere, is supposedly pushing down on me and in coordination with the 1,000-mile-per-hour spin of the Earth, right? So if you think about it, the air at the tippy top of the atmosphere is some many miles above the surface. So in order for it to stay, sort of parallel and in accordance with the spin of the Earth, it'd have to be traveling faster and faster and faster as it gets higher, because it's going across a much greater arc in the same amount of time, right? So what's causing the atmosphere to spin faster and faster and faster as it goes up and gets less dense, right? And by the way, how is it possible for the atmosphere to exist next to the vacuum of space anyways? That's, gravity too, right? The mystical, unproven, false theory of gravity. So.
Okay. The air inside should expand out. So let's do that. Whoa! Something interesting happened. They expanded tremendously. The air inside them expanded and pushed the solid outward. But if you notice, they popped a little bit. They popped a little bit because possibly the air was pulled out of the marshmallow. So they're this size right now because of very little air pressure. So if I was to put the air back in, because the air was drawn out, let's see what happens. All right, so I'm going to take the air out, unhook this hose here, and we should see the actual size. So we decreased the pressure, the volume got bigger, decreased the pressure, the volume got bigger, whoa! 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 Whoa!
I did have a couple of questions for you from the live chat, Morgal, if that's cool with you. Jordan Rains, who is one of our regular listeners and a good commentator, he says he finds it odd that Morgal is a Christian and yet he doesn't believe in the firmament. Would you like to expand upon your beliefs about Scripture, about Christianity, and how you reconcile it with your beliefs about the plane?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. I've got a couple different theories on this. One is the firmament may have been talking about the ice that was above us before the sun that was light melted it. Okay, it talks about dividing the waters that were above and joining them with the waters below. If you think about it, the firmament could have been the ice on top of us that was melted into the waters below. Okay, that's one theory that's totally in line with biblical teachings. On the other hand, the King James Version of the Bible has been, if you really go deep back into the origins of quote-unquote the lucrative business of Christianity, it's far and away of the teachings of Christ or Yeshua. Okay, so there's a good chance, and it's basically proven that through all of the translations, whether deliberately or not manipulatively, just by simply mistranslating certain things, I mean that does tend to occur. So I mean, I guess you could say that the different variations of the Bible, or as the Bible evolved into the book that we know it as today, was really started by the Roman Emperor Constantine, who wanted to sort of co-opt and control Christianity by merging it with the already existing pagan religions that were practiced in Rome. That's how you get Easter and different astrological holidays in the Christian faith. That's because Christianity was merged with Roman paganism and other esoteric things to get the abomination that we have today in the form of the Roman Catholic Church and even the Orthodox churches and even now the Protestant churches. So, I do read the Bible, okay? I do know my Bible, but I also try to follow the teachings of Christ, because I think that's what makes you a Christian, and not thumping the Bible is what makes you a Christian. There's a lot of contradictions in the Bible. I believe I believe it's a perversion or an inversion, or at least, sort of a deception of whatever might have been the true Word of God. Now, with that being said, if you could imagine them sort of twisting the idea of the firmament and the pillars and that sort of thing as the original control mechanism, right? Because think about it this way. If religion's goal was to control people, which it was, not Christianity, okay, but the institutionalized brick-and-mortar lucrative controlling business of, quote, Christianity, if they wanted to control people, which they did, wouldn't it be nice if, if the earth was flat, of course, but it just simply ended at the edges? Well, at those days, we really couldn't travel or explore to the edges. We didn't really have the technology, but eventually that had to merge because it didn't really make sense, and science was starting to look at it. So they theorized that we were just one of those spheres, hurling around in space and all that nonsense. Okay, so essentially the enclosed system was the original, in this other theory of mine, the original controlling mechanism through the book, the Bible, okay? But now that people are more scientific, then we must be on one of those spheres, spinning around. So, but again, it could go either way. To me, I think that the firmament could have meant the ice above us, and dividing the waters above with the waters below could have something to do with the let there be light, the sun melts it, and that kind of jives with it if you look at the scripture, so.
Okay, then I've got a question for you, a bit of a change of pace, and as we get towards the end of the show, I think it'll tie in nicely with the final thoughts. I wanted to ask you, since you've discovered what you've discovered about the failure of the ball Earth model and just how preposterous many elements of it are, can you give the listeners some idea of how it's changed your life, your relationships with those around you, the way that you speak with people, the way that you see the world? Can you give us an idea as to the effect that it's had on you as a person outside of the internet?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I work a full-time job. I do have a life outside of flat Earth, but since I've started looking at it, it's been very important to me because when I finally came to realize the truth, and it is the truth, I'll tell you, I had a lot of problems, not major problems, but with, anxiety, not so much night terrors, but, sleep paralysis and arrhythmia of the heart, and just all sorts of, I guess you could say, deep, psychological sort of nervousness, which I think is ingrained into the globe model. Because, if you think we're on a speck of dust hurling around the sun, flying through space, we're just some random accident, nothing special here. We're just, just a speck in an infinite sea. It's kind of, it's belittling. It makes humans seem almost like, like a virus as opposed to the heralds of the world. And so when you do finally realize the truth, one thing that happened with me is I don't have any, I don't have the night terrors, I don't have the sleep paralysis, I don't have the arrhythmias, I sleep a lot better. I find it easier and easier by the day to sort of help people understand, and it is very important to me. So most of my videos are about the flat Earth. But if you check out my YouTube channel, TheMorgile, TheMorgile, I got a lot of videos on stuff other than flat Earth, things I find important. So if you're interested, check it out, subscribe, and I've got all day if you guys want to keep going. So.
Well, I would love to keep going. I just don't want to get in too much trouble with my housemates. They might even be listening,
Sure.
So if enough of the people in the live chat give them a shout out, maybe we can go to closer to 3 hours. But Matrix, you know that this is a topic that I like to talk about a lot. Not just what we're doing online and the videos that we make and the roundtables that we have, but the effect that it's having on people's lives, because I've seen certain individuals trying to propagate this notion that by talking about this is somehow spreading fear, that we're getting people afraid that they're stuck in a dome and stuff like this. And I think to myself, of all the objections you could make to ball Earth skepticism, that would have to be the single worst, because for me, what this has done is make me feel so much lighter on my feet. I already had serious doubts about human evolution and all the nonsense that goes with that. This idea that we're a speck of dust, it doesn't matter, that we're hurtling through space, we were born, we die 70 years later, no one cares, nothing matters, it's all just by chance. I already had serious problems with that, but this ball Earth skepticism has helped me to realize there's a reason why I have a problem with that, because it's all nonsense, and I feel so much better for it. and the people who I interact with in the real world who are questioning this stuff, I can see it in them as well. They seem happier. And I like to ask the people who we get on the show, how has this affected you? And time again, it seems like the guests tell us that it's made them feel lighter on their feet. They're feeling happier. They feel less stressed, as Morgal has just said. Matrix, would you like to expand upon your own feelings in your life? What effect this has had on you?
Yeah, well, I think the whole waking up process. I mean, as Morgal described, I had something similar about a few years ago now, and to do with the sleep paralysis and the sort of trauma that you kind of go through. I think there's a spiritual element to it all, and there seems to be this divide between people who believe in perhaps the atheist scientific materialism worldview, and those people that perhaps believe in a creator. Different religions, if you like, and so this is a whole big dynamic to what's going on, and the debate and people's belief systems. But I think there's a spiritual aspect to it all.
Yeah, well, the truth will always set you free, and it's not just a saying. It's just the way it goes. I mean, if you're lied to your whole life, give you an example. I like to go back to Santa Claus, because most people are taught, Santa Claus or, the tooth fairy or whatever the thing is. People are taught that is true and correct for, the first few years of their life, just like they're taught the globe model the first few years of their life. But the difference is when you take away the Santa Claus, it hurts a little bit at first. Feelings are hurt. Oh my God, there's some denial. You go through the stages, right? Denial and da-da-da-da-da-da. But at the end of it, the truth always sets you free. And in the words of Yeshua, his Father's kingdom is not of this world. Doesn't necessarily mean it's in the sky or it's in another planet, but it could just be another world over. Who knows? But yeah, I think it's freeing. I think it's I definitely feel lighter, and it just explains so much. I love it when things make sense. I love it when puzzles come together, and when you really sit down and scrutinize the globe model versus the infinite plane model, it just makes a lot of sense. And if you're a logical person or a scientific person, it's any eureka moment is memorable. So.
Well said. Well, I'll tell you what, guys, it's been a terrific chat. We originally wanted to go 2 hours. We've gone to 2.5. I think it's been well worth it. And if you'd like to join us again, Morgal, we'd love to have you back on board at some point in the future. It is time to wrap up the show, though, so we'll go to our final thoughts, and we'll start off with you there, Matrix, for episode 8 of the Baller Skeptic Roundtable. Sadly, we didn't have David Weiss with us tonight, but apart from that, I think it's been a terrific show. I'm so glad that we've done it like this. I want to give you the chance to get your final thoughts out for episode 8, Matrix, on, it's now July 30 for me here in Brisbane, July 29 for the rest of you guys around the flat plane.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, it's been great having Morgal on the show. I think he's covered lots of different topics and aspects of this whole overarching conspiracy, the deception, how we're being manipulated, and all covering lots of the flat Earth and globe Earth problems. So yeah, I'd like to say thanks again, Morgal, and I hope to have you on the show again sometime.
Yeah, anytime, just let me know. I'm sorry I didn't get to talk to Dave. You guys see Dave, tell him I said hey, and it's been a real pleasure. I really am honored and flattered to be on the show with you guys.
Well, before you take off then, Morgal, I'll get my final thoughts out. We'll do a music break, and then just stick around in the hangout, and we'll have a post-show after chat, which is usually for me and listeners, please take this the right way. For me, it's the most fun part of the show because I'm not trying to host, to ask questions, and to check the live chat. It is actually a bit mentally exhausting. So I'm looking forward to that, Morgal. You stick around. My final thoughts are these. Firstly, Nathan Ramos in the live chat, who asked about people not exposing this, and I said that people had. What I'll do for you, Nathan, because he says that he'll read these books, I'll link to them. Many of them are public domain now. You're allowed to get them for free. They're hosted on Project Gutenberg, whatever it's called. So I'll post links to those underneath this video on YouTube. Just read them. I printed them out. I bought a copy of Dubé's book for $10. I then also downloaded and printed out the others. It cost me, I think, $20 to have all of them printed out and bound. And now I've got them there, and I just read through them bit by bit, slowly, in my own time. Recently, I started looking into tides. It blew me away how ridiculous the arguments for tides is. So then I just looked at the indexes for each of the books, found out their section of tides, read their interpretations of the tides. They all had slightly different interpretations. Came to my own conclusions. I'm still thinking about it. That's what research is meant to be about. That's what the so-called truth community is supposed to be about. doing our own research. So what I'll do, Nathan, is I'll link to those underneath this video on YouTube. And Prometheus says, when will this video be available for download after the show? What YouTube do is, the moment the show finishes, they start rendering. Usually in about 30 minutes, it'll be available for you to watch right from the start. And that should be how it works tonight, unless they block us. A few more final thoughts, guys, just bear with me. Many of you know that I've got a new John the Bond channel in case this one gets taken down. I recently had a copyright warning. If I get another one, they'll give me a strike. I won't be able to do live shows. So please subscribe to my backup channel so that if we have to, we can use that for live shows. It's called John the Bond Extra. You'll find a video about it and links to that on my main channel. I'll provide a link to it underneath this video as well. John the Bond Extra, please subscribe to that. Shameless plug. I've also started another channel called Ball Earth Skeptic, and it just has the archive of all the episodes that we've done from episode 0 right through to today, episode 8, and going through to the end of the season. So it might be worth subscribing to that. Not quite as important, but if ever they banned my main channel and my second channel and Matrix's channel and Dearth channel, we'd use that as a 5th option. So you might want to consider subscribing to that one, but that's optional. Just wanted you guys to know that it was there. Again, the links for everything and the timestamps for this episode will be updated probably in the next day or two. I've got other things that I do with my life as well, but I'll try and get around to updating the timestamps and the links to make it easy for you guys to share. And I want to say a huge thanks to those of you who are sharing the show. Each episode has gotten something like 3,000 views on my channel alone, and then people like Eric Dubay and Jeronism have uploaded it to their channel. Their versions have got thousands of views as well. And what that tells me is that people are sharing this stuff, and that's the most important thing. It's one thing for us to do the show and for Morgal to take time out of his day to give us his time and be a guest, but this goes nowhere unless you're sharing it. So for each and every one of you who's taken the time to share one of these episodes with those around you, I truly appreciate it. And even just for tuning in, the fact that you guys are there, we had almost 100 live viewers on this show today. And what that tells me is not just that people appreciate the work that we're doing, but people are genuinely interested in this topic. And I think that is absolutely terrific. I hope that you guys do as well. And if you truly believe that we might not be in a spinning ball, then it can be as simple as asking questions, which leads to my next final thought, which is many of you are aware of the ASH experiments, ASCH, the ASH experiments. I'll provide a link underneath this video to that as well. And basically what the ASH experiment showed is that if there's a group consensus, people are very likely to go along with the group. But if even one person breaks the group consensus, all of a sudden the people with doubts are willing to speak out. Now I like to think that with this show, we're that person who are speaking out and saying, hey, we don't believe in the ball, and we're happy to talk about that. We're happy to stake our credibility on saying that we don't believe in the theory of gravity anymore. We like to think that we're doing that with this show. You can do that in your own life just by asking people questions, whether it's about why the UN flag matches the flat Earth map, why NASA's footage is so ridiculous, why it looks like there's a picture of Pluto on the photo of Pluto, whatever it is, just asking questions. You don't need to go and proselytize to people and tell them that you think the Earth is flat. Just by asking questions, you can start to do something truly magical, because all these people haven't questioned anything since they were 5 years old. I want to say a huge thanks to everyone who's been part of the show. Morgal has been a terrific guest. I'll provide a link to his channel underneath this video on YouTube, and I'm going to play us out tonight with a song that I think is rather appropriate, and it ties into what we've been talking about, the fact that when you start questioning what we're on, all of a sudden you might start finding some real fascination with it. And not fascination with fake photos of fake satellites and fake CGI pictures of planets. I mean real fascination with the real Earth on which we stand, because it truly is fascinating, and I've only come to realize that as I've been doing this show and doing my research. I encourage you to do it as well. Thanks to everyone. I've said thanks to many times.